I never expected that a simple weekend getaway in my old Volkswagen Westphalia would turn into something that haunted me long after the engine cooled. I remember the moment I pulled off the asphalt and onto the thin, winding forest road, a ribbon of gray swallowed by shadows. The smell of pine was sharp, almost medicinal, cutting through the humid air, and the gravel crunched under my tires with each cautious turn. I had planned this trip meticulously. A few days alone, a notebook to write in, a camera to capture the wilderness, and my trusty van that had carried me across countless highways and quiet towns. Nothing in those plans included fear. Not real fear. Not the kind that creeps in slowly, burrows into your chest, and refuses to leave. I first noticed them when I had set up camp in the clearing just beyond the creek. It was an official campsite, but secluded. One of those places that feels like it's left behind on a map, where the only visitors are the most determined or the most lost. I was rolling out my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the tiny hairs on the back of my neck standing up, when I saw movement at the edge of the tree line. Shadows shifted in ways that didn't make sense. Not animals, not the wind. It was subtle, like the forest itself was breathing, watching. And then I heard the faint crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. I told myself it was someone else camping, maybe a local or another traveler like me. But when I peeked through the curtain of my van's sliding door, there was no one there. Just the trees, dark and motionless, stretching taller than I remembered from the map. And yet a sense of being observed didn't leave me. I shrugged it off, telling myself the solitude had made me anxious. I had done this alone before, sometimes hours, even days, without a trace of worry. Something about this clearing felt different. It pressed in, as if the shadows themselves were aware of my presence. That night, I made a fire. The crackle of the flames was comforting at first, a shield against the invisible eyes. I roasted a small dinner, tried to focus on the notebook where I scribbled aimless thoughts, memories, ideas, and then I heard it, the softest of knocks against the van. 3 taps, spaced almost evenly. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. There was no wind, no branches brushing against the metal, just 3 distinct, deliberate knocks. My hands gripped the notebook tightly. I reminded myself that it was probably a wandering raccoon or some forest creature. Rationality has a way of screaming louder than fear, at least at first. I tried to sleep, but the knocking didn't stop. Sometimes it was a single tap. Sometimes it was a quick series, almost like someone was testing the doors, the walls, the very fabric of my van. I wanted to convince myself that it wasn't human. But deep down, a part of me, the instinct I had learned to trust through years of camping, was screaming that I wasn't alone. I finally slid the curtain aside, flashlight trembling in my hand, and looked out into the darkness. And there they were. I couldn't see their faces clearly, only silhouettes, shapes that moved with deliberate caution. At first I thought I imagined it, but then they stepped into the moonlight, and what I saw made me freeze. Faces like mine. Faces I could recognize in any crowd, human, familiar, yet impossibly wrong. They weren't smiling. Not exactly. It was more like a mimicry of expression, a hollow imitation that hit my gut like a stone. I blinked, convinced the shadows were playing tricks, but when I looked again, they hadn't moved. I swallowed hard and whispered to myself, trying to calm the sudden panic rising in my chest. They're campers, just campers, people like you. But even as I said it, the rationality felt flimsy, brittle, because then one of them, tall, wearing a jacket that looked like it could have been mine, lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, and waved. Not a friendly wave, a calculated one, as though to remind me they knew I saw them. And then, just as silently as they appeared, they retreated into the trees, vanishing, gone. No sound, no footprints. I didn't sleep much after that. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine running low, lights off, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The forest was alive with the usual sounds, the call of a distant owl, the rustle of the creek, but the tension, the weight of being watched, lingered. I wondered if I should pack up and leave, drive into the nearest town, and call it a night. But part of me, The stubborn part that loved the quiet isolation, the freedom of sleeping in my Volkswagen in the middle of nowhere, refused. I told myself I was stronger than fear, that curiosity and courage were what had brought me here in the first place. The morning light brought a false sense of relief. Everything seemed normal. Birds chirped, the dew clung to the grass, and the van, my old trusty companion, felt secure. I ventured to the creek to wash my face, thinking I'd convince myself the events of the night were imagination. And then I saw them again. Not the shadows this time, but real people emerging from the forest's edge, carrying packs and gear, their eyes locked on mine, faces like mine. And now they smiled. A real smile, or at least the closest thing to it I had seen. That smile didn't comfort me. It unsettled me. I wanted to drive away, to escape the unease pressing against my ribs. But part of me watched, morbidly fascinated. One of them approached, a woman who could have been my reflection, except for the way her eyes didn't quite focus on me, like she was reading a script I didn't understand. She spoke, softly, almost conspiratorially, asking if I was camping alone. I nodded, voice caught in my throat. Her response was casual, too casual, a comment about the weather, about the roads, about how quiet the clearing was. And then she nodded toward the trees behind me. "Others like us go that way," she said, gesturing vaguely. I turned my head, heart hammering, and saw nothing. Nothing but shadows. I felt a strange compulsion to follow, to step into the forest where reality seemed to shift. But logic won over. I told them I needed to pack, that I had plans, and the way they nodded again, silently, almost approvingly, gave me chills. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't insist. Just a quiet, heavy presence, lingering in the peripheral of my vision as I retreated to the van. By mid-morning, they had dispersed. I convinced myself they were real campers, maybe locals, maybe people who'd arrived overnight. But the details didn't add up. Their gear wasn't right, their movements too precise, too deliberate. And the most disturbing part, no traces of them were left behind. No footprints in the soft mud near the creek. No litter. Nothing. Just the lingering sense of being watched. A shadow pressing on the edges of my mind. That afternoon, I drove to another campsite a few miles down the road, hoping to find normalcy, hoping to shake the anxiety from the morning. But as I parked and opened the door, I saw them again. Sitting around a fire just beyond the trees, faces half lit by flames, faces like mine. They waved, but the gesture felt like a test, a challenge. And I realized then that this wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. Somehow these people or these things knew I was here. They had been following, waiting. And the forest, which had once felt like a refuge, now seemed alive, complicit, almost sentient in its attention. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring from the safety of my Volkswagen, debating whether to approach or flee. I knew fear, real fear now, coursed through my veins. It wasn't a sudden shock, not a scream in the night. It was the slow, gnawing awareness that the world I understood, quiet, safe, predictable, was no longer reliable, and that the people, or the beings, I saw were not just strangers. They were mirrors. Reflections of me, twisted by something I could not yet name, staring back with intent. I finally turned the key and drove. The van's headlights cut through the deepening dusk, illuminating the road in a thin, trembling beam. Behind me, I thought I saw eyes in the trees. Faces. Watching. Waiting. And the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, a labyrinth of green shadows that pressed in from every side. My pulse raced, and yet a strange determination settled in. I would not be swallowed. I would not vanish quietly like so many stories that get whispered around campfires. I would move forward. I would confront what was following me. Somehow. The road twisted beneath me like a ribbon of shadow and gravel, and each turn felt longer than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I couldn't stop glancing into the rearview mirror. For a long stretch, the forest swallowed the headlights, nothing visible, nothing alive, and then, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure step between the trees. A flash of familiarity, a face, fleeting, like a photograph caught in motion. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself I was tired, on edge, letting the adrenaline and lack of sleep warp reality. That was comforting, briefly. Denial is a gentle anesthetic, but the moment passed, leaving only the raw, insistent awareness that I wasn't alone. Not in the literal sense, at least. Someone or something was tracking the edges of my presence, just outside perception. I slowed the van, heart pounding, breathing hard. The forest seemed to close in, and the crunch of gravel under tires sounded amplified, like a warning echoing through the dark. I found another clearing just past an abandoned ranger station. It wasn't marked on any map, at least not clearly. The ground was soft with pine needles, and the remnants of a fire pit suggested someone had been here before me. I parked, deciding I needed rest, needed to gather my thoughts before the forest completely unraveled my sense of safety. I stepped out, the air cold against my face, and a faint mist was curling along the low hills like smoke from a long extinguished fire. The silence was oppressive. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that hums in your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum of panic. I set up my small stove, making a hasty meal, and tried to ignore the way the trees seemed to lean toward me, branches arching like fingers. And then I heard it again, soft footsteps, deliberate, circling the clearing. I froze. My eyes darted to the edge of the tree line, but nothing moved. Not a shadow, not a flicker, only the cold, static awareness that I was being observed. Hours passed like this, the day bleeding into night. I tried to read, to write, to focus on anything but the creeping sensation that I was under surveillance. And then I saw them, not one, but several emerging slowly from the tree line, faces like mine. Standing in the dim light of the van, their features blurred, expressions neutral, almost clinical. I could count the familiar lines of a face I knew too well, mirrored, twisted, alien in the subtle way humans can become uncanny. My instincts screamed to drive, to vanish, but my body refused. A part of me, a foolish, curious part, wanted to understand. They didn't speak, only moved with that same deliberate slowness as though they were performing for me. And then one stepped closer, tilting their head, studying me with eyes that should have been mine. I felt the impossible weight of recognition. They knew me the way I know myself when I lie awake in a silent van at 3 a.m, afraid of shadows. I asked, voice barely a whisper, Who are you? No response, just the way the forest seemed to hush around them, every sound muffled, every breeze stilled. And then, without warning, the figure lifted a hand, pointing toward the deeper woods. I hesitated, dread knotting in my stomach. My first instinct was to refuse, to retreat into the safety of the van, to drive away and never look back. But something, a whisper I couldn't place, an echo of curiosity, pushed me forward. I stepped out, leaving the van door slightly ajar, and followed them into the mist. Each step on the soft forest floor was measured, deliberate, my senses heightened to an unbearable degree. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, set my nerves taut. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but compelled. They led me to a narrow trail, barely discernible, winding deep into a section of forest I hadn't seen on any map. The trees pressed close, the mist thickened, and the light dimmed until the only thing I could focus on was their movement. We walked for what felt like hours. There was no conversation, no guidance beyond the silent gestures. But I began to notice details, small things that unnerved me. One of them carried a lantern, the flame flickering in impossible hues, casting shadows that didn't align with reality. Their footsteps never left impressions in the soft earth. Occasionally, I would glance at them, half expecting the familiar face to falter, to humanize itself, and each time the faces remained smooth, uncanny, perfect, yet wrong. And then I saw it. The clearing ahead was unlike anything I had expected. It was almost like a village built by the forest itself. Huts and small structures made from branches, mud, and bark, arranged in patterns that felt intentional, like a geometric puzzle only nature could solve. Fires burned without smoke, a faint, earthy scent hung in the air, sweet and rotten at once. And around these structures, more of them appeared. Faces like mine, faces like anyone I've ever known, watching silently. Their eyes followed me with patient attention. I realized in a flash that made my stomach plummet that I was the intruder here. Not them. I had come into their world uninvited, and my presence disrupted something I could not yet name. A small voice inside me whispered, "They aren't dangerous, they just exist, and existence is enough to unsettle you." But even as I considered this, the forest around us seemed to pulse. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways. The fires flickered violently, almost as if responding to my fear. My mind raced. Was this some strange commune of people living off-grid, a survivalist group? But the faces, they were too familiar, too eerily mirrored to be coincidental. I took a step back. They mirrored my hesitation, matching it with uncanny precision, until it became impossible to tell where I ended and they began. I felt my resolve falter. I wanted to leave, to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. The realization that the forest, the path, and the people were in a feedback loop with my fear gnawed at my sanity. Every instinct screamed escape, but another part of me, the part that had fallen in love with the freedom of Volkswagen camping, the solitude, the quiet communion with nature, reminded me that curiosity had always led me to the most profound experiences. I made a choice, not a courageous one, not even a rational one, but a necessary one. I would move forward, deeper into the clearing, and face whatever it was they wanted me to see. Every step was a battle against my own racing heart, every breath a fight to maintain control. And then, in the center of the clearing, I found the object of their attention. A large, flat stone worn smooth, with etchings that were both familiar and alien, patterns that seemed to mimic the lines of a face, a mirror of the human visage carved into nature itself. One of them stepped forward, closer than the rest, a perfect reflection of me. And in that moment, I understood. They were not human in the way I am human, but not entirely other either. They were reflections of fear, of hesitation, of curiosity, manifestations of the choices I had made and the roads I had traveled, literal and figurative. The forest had shaped them, and in turn, they shaped my perception. I don't remember how I left that night. I don't remember if I ran or simply retraced my steps, guided by the silent warnings of the mirrored faces. But I remember the Volkswagen, headlights cutting through mist, engine growling beneath me as though sensing my urgency. I remember the road stretching endlessly ahead, the trees receding into shadows, and the oppressive knowledge that somewhere behind me, they still watched. And I remember the lesson, etched deeper than the forest carvings. Fear is not always about what lurks outside. Sometimes it's the reflection staring back at you in the quietest moments that holds the power to unnerve, to shape, to teach. And sometimes the road you choose, the campsite you enter, the solitude you crave, becomes the crucible where fear and courage collide. The next morning, I woke in the van with the sunrise crawling along the forest floor, weak and uncertain. The Volkswagen felt smaller than usual, almost confining, and the air inside carried a dampness I couldn't shake. My hands were still trembling from the night before. I told myself it was exhaustion that I'd imagined the clearing, the mirrored faces, the stone with carvings like human faces. But the unease persisted, coiling in my chest like smoke, slow and suffocating. I packed quickly, almost mechanically, and drove along the forest road, the mist curling around my headlights. Every bend in the asphalt felt like a potential trap, every shadow a threat. I wanted to convince myself I was leaving the forest behind, leaving the nightmare behind. But rational thought felt weak. The images of the clearing, of the faces, were burned into my memory, refusing to fade, insisting that I had only scratched the surface of something far older, far stranger than I could understand. Midday brought a brief respite. The forest opened onto a sunlit glade, and for a moment I felt normal. Birds sang in earnest, and the van rolled over soft dirt roads that smelled of wildflowers and spring rain. I told myself that if I could reach the next town, if I could see people who were undeniably human, I could reclaim control. And yet, even as I thought it, I noticed movement at the edges of the glade, shadows that didn't belong. And then I saw them, another group, sitting on logs, staring silently, faces like mine. Their eyes, unreadable, locked on the van. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel, and pressed the accelerator. I needed distance, needed certainty. but they followed. Not in the way humans follow, no vehicles, no overt motion, but in the subtle sense of presence, the almost imperceptible weight in the periphery of vision. It was as if the forest itself had remembered me, had aligned its patterns to ensure I couldn't escape the scrutiny of these reflections. Hours passed in a blur. I drove through empty roads, abandoned picnic areas, and tiny crossroads that seemed to vanish the moment I passed. Every time I stopped for gas, for food, or even to stretch my legs, I felt them there. Not touching me, not speaking, but waiting, watching. A patient, deliberate audience. And the Volkswagen, which had always felt like a home, now felt like a fragile shell, the thin metal walls barely containing the anxiety inside. By late afternoon, I arrived at a clearing that had no map marker, no real entrance from the main road. Exhaustion and panic combined in a way that made my limbs heavy, my mind hazy, but the curiosity that had brought me into these woods forced me to pause. The forest here was unnervingly quiet, as though even the wind had decided to hold its breath. And then I saw them. More of them, arranged along the tree line in silent clusters, like sentinels. Faces like mine, some familiar, some subtly different, as though they were drawn from fragments of memory, snapshots of people I had known or imagined knowing. I felt the compulsion again, the irresistible pull toward the center of the clearing. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, stepping out into the thick, damp air. Every step forward was deliberate, measured, because the forest seemed to respond to motion. Branches swayed as though brushing my shoulders, shadows shifted to match my pace, and the mist thickened around my ankles, curling upward like tendrils trying to tether me in place. In the center of the clearing was a structure. Not a building, not exactly, but a formation of twisted branches, roots, and stones shaped into a rough semblance of a doorway. A faint glow emanated from within, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, and standing in the light were three of them. Three faces like mine, more defined than the others, more real. One stepped forward, a perfect reflection, down to the slight scar above my left eyebrow, the one I'd had since childhood. My stomach dropped. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I understood the message before it left their lips. You cannot leave without seeing, without acknowledging. I wanted to run. I wanted to lock the van and drive into anything, anywhere that felt safe. But my legs refused. My body, though trembling, obeyed some deeper instinct. Some part of me that knew this was not a threat to my life, but a reckoning of a different kind. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the doorway. Inside, I glimpsed something that made my heart tighten, walls carved with intricate faces, etched in ways that mirrored expressions of fear, curiosity, hesitation, and recognition. Each one felt alive, as though capturing a moment of consciousness, a fragment of human thought. My own reflection stared back at me from one panel, and I realized then that the faces, the mirrored figures in the forest, were extensions of the forest itself, extensions of the human psyche drawn outward into the tangible world. I stepped closer, every sense screaming caution, every instinct warning me, and yet a strange clarity settled in. Fear had become a lens through which I could see more than the surface. I saw patterns, echoes, connections. The forest was alive not just in trees and soil, but in the human mind that entered it. And these faces, these other campers, were not malevolent. They were mirrors, teachers, challenges, reminders of what it meant to be aware, to be cautious, to respect the unknown. As I turned to leave to return to my Volkswagen, a soft whisper brushed against my ear. Not words, not sentences, just a vibration of understanding. You cannot ignore what watches, what waits, what reflects, but you can choose how you walk forward. I left the clearing slowly, deliberately. The mirrored figures did not follow. They did not wave, did not speak. They simply existed, a presence that pressed against the edges of thought without breaking it. And the forest, which had been both prison and teacher, allowed me passage back to the roads I knew, the highways that led to towns, to light, to normalcy. When I finally reached the asphalt that marked the edge of the forest, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to loosen. The The Volkswagen carried me steadily, engine purring like a faithful companion. And though I never saw the faces again, though the forest returned to its ordinary quiet, I could feel them lingering in memory. A subtle, persistent lesson. Fear was not the absence of control, nor the presence of danger. It was recognition, awareness, a mirror of choice. And I realized, driving away, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to continue forward despite it. That night, in a small town hundreds of miles from the forest, I parked the van outside a diner and sat quietly, listening to the hum of civilization. My hands finally unclenched. My mind, still racing, found fragments of calm in the ordinary. And I knew, deep down, that I would return to the forest one day. Not recklessly, not blindly, but because the reflection of fear when faced with courage and curiosity had a lesson that could not be learned anywhere else. Volkswagen camping had always been about freedom, about the road, about solitude. That trip transformed it into a crucible, a mirror, a journey into the edges of perception. And as I sipped coffee in the fading neon light, I understood something profound. The faces like ours, the other campers, were not there to haunt. They were there to teach, to remind, to challenge the way we see ourselves in silence, in solitude, and in the quiet, echoing wilderness where fear and courage intertwine. The following days blurred into a strange, unsettled rhythm. I drove slowly along back roads and forest trails, always alert, always scanning the edges of the trees for a flicker of movement that might signal another glimpse of them. At night, I camped in quiet clearings, setting up my Volkswagen with meticulous care, listening for every rustle of leaves, every distant call of an owl. But the forest was silent in response, as though waiting for me to learn the final lesson before I could truly leave. And then it happened. On a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, I saw the shadows first. At first, I thought it was the wind, the trees, the play of light. But as I drove closer, the shapes solidified. Faces like mine, standing just at the edge of the tree line, watching. Not with malice, not with curiosity alone, but with expectation. My chest tightened. I had been anticipating this, almost hoping to see them again, but now that the moment arrived, fear threatened to swallow me whole. I parked the Volkswagen, engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sun was low, casting long, distorted shadows across the ridge. The figures didn't move forward. They didn't need to. Their presence alone pressed against my mind, echoing memories of the forest clearing, of the carved faces, of the unspoken understanding that had settled over me days ago. One stepped forward, hands raised, palms outward. The gesture was deliberate, almost ritualistic. And then a sound, not a voice, not words, but a low hum like wind through hollow trees, filled the space between us. I felt it resonate through my bones. The message was clear: acknowledgement, recognition, acceptance. Fear was no longer the enemy. It was the bridge. I took a deep breath and walked toward them, each step measured. As I did, I felt the forest's weight lifting, the edges of reality stretching back into familiar proportions. They mirrored me, yes, but no longer as a threat. Their expressions softened, just enough to remind me that the uncanny familiarity had purpose. It wasn't torment, it was guidance. At the edge of the ridge, one figure gestured toward the valley below, toward the winding road that led out of the trees. I understood. The journey had always been about balance. Curiosity without caution can lead one astray. Fear without courage can imprison. And the Volkswagen, faithful and unyielding, symbolized both: freedom to explore, responsibility to navigate wisely, awareness to perceive the world and oneself fully. I returned to the van and drove slowly down the ridge, the mirrored figures receding into the shadows of the trees. The road stretched ahead, familiar and yet changed in subtle ways. Every tree, every curve, every rustle in the underbrush seemed imbued with memory, carrying a reminder of what had occurred. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I was no longer the same person who had driven into the forest days ago. The fear, the unease, the encounters, they had shaped me, tempered me. Later that evening, in a small campground along a river, I finally stopped. I parked the Volkswagen, rolled out the sleeping bag, and sat in the quiet, listening to the water and the distant calls of night birds. There were no figures this time, no shadows, no uncanny reflections, just the soft hum of the river and the comforting presence of the van. I let myself exhale fully, the tension finally ebbing, but the memory remained, vivid, precise, alive. The lessons of the forest, of the mirrored faces, would linger indefinitely. In the following weeks, I recounted the story to myself countless times, each retelling layered with reflection and understanding. The Volkswagen trips I had taken before seemed simpler in retrospect, almost naive. And yet, I recognized that each adventure had built the instincts, the awareness, and the resilience that had carried me through the forest and its mirrors. The encounters, though terrifying, had revealed a truth I had often overlooked. Fear, when confronted deliberately and without denial, can be a teacher. It sharpens perception, hons judgment, and illuminates the paths we otherwise overlook. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it, to walk forward when every instinct screams to turn away, to continue on a path that demands both respect and awareness. Weeks later, I returned to the van, now parked in my driveway, its paint dull from the road dust and its engine resting after countless miles. I ran my hand along the worn steering wheel, the leather familiar and comforting, and reflected on the experience. Volkswagen camping would always carry the promise of freedom and adventure. But now, for me, it also carried the memory of shadows, of reflections, of lessons learned deep in the forests where fear and courage meet. And I understood finally that the other campers, the faces like ours, were never meant to harm. They were reminders, silent, patient, persistent, that the world is more complex than we assume, and that every path we take, every clearing we enter, carries echoes of our choices, of our instincts, and of the courage we muster in the quiet, unguarded moments. I fell asleep that night in the van, the river's whisper outside blending with the hum of tires rolling over past miles, and felt a profound sense of clarity. Fear had visited me, walked beside me, mirrored me, but it had not defeated me, it had taught me. And in that teaching, I found not only the courage to continue exploring, but the humility to respect the unseen, the uncanny, and the quiet power of reflection. Volkswagen camping, I realized, was never just about roads and destinations. It was about the journeys within. The landscapes outside mirrored the landscapes of the mind, and sometimes the most profound lessons, the ones that leave shadows on memory, come from places we least expect, from encounters that challenge perception, and from faces that are, in essence, our own. That night, as I drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, I felt the forest not as a threat, but as a presence that had changed me, gently and irrevocably. The shadows would always be there in memory, the echoes of eyes that mirrored my own, and the knowledge that courage and fear are not opposites, but companions, walking together along every winding road we choose to follow. And I knew, without doubt, that I would return one day, not because I sought fear, but because I sought understanding. And understanding is a journey that never truly ends. I've spent most of my life on the road, driving across the United States in an old Volkswagen camper that rattles every time the wind shifts against it. My name is Daniel, I'm 42, and if there's one thing I've learned about America's forgotten places, it's this. Silence is never just silence. It always carries a memory, a whisper of something left behind. That truth has followed me through empty highways, through ghost towns, and through the desolate skeletons of RV parks that once promised joy and community. But the silence inside those parks doesn't feel dead. It feels alive. The first time I stumbled across one was in New Mexico, out in the desert about 30 miles off the interstate. I wasn't looking for anything, just a flat spot to spend the night away from the truck stops, away from the constant hum of engines and fluorescent lights. I had read once that the desert could swallow whole towns when people forgot to love them. And maybe that thought was what nudged me off the paved road and onto the dirt path, leading toward a cluster of darkened structures. The air that night was still, heavy, and dry enough to crack my lips. Every crunch of gravel beneath my tires echoed like I was trespassing in a church at midnight. What caught my eye first was the sign. It leaned crooked on rusted poles, paint faded but still legible. Sunny Sands RV Park. The name felt like a cruel joke. There was no sun, only a swollen orange moon hanging too low, and the sand was broken by weeds that had risen like veins through the asphalt. I should have turned around right there. But curiosity is a strange fuel. It pulls you forward, even when your gut tells you the tank is empty. I drove past the sign and into what used to be the main loop. Campsites lined both sides of a cracked road, concrete pads sprouting tumbleweeds and desert grass. Old electrical hookups stood like tombstones, their wires stripped out, their doors hanging open. There were picnic tables too, warped from the sun, splinters catching the glow of my headlights like bones under skin. And then there were the trailers. 6 of them, scattered like forgotten chess pieces. Some still had curtains, their fabric shredded but swaying gently as though someone had just walked by. The Volkswagen groaned as I parked near the office building. I could see through its broken windows, a reception desk, yellowed binders, a register left half open. Everything looked abandoned for decades. And yet the place felt like it had only just exhaled its last breath when I arrived. That's the thing about abandoned RV parks. They don't rot the way houses do. They linger, stubborn, as if waiting for travelers who will never return. I stepped outside, and the air smelled faintly of rust and creosote, with something sweeter beneath it, like spoiled fruit. The desert nights usually smell sharp, dry, almost metallic. But this was different. It clung to the back of my throat like I was inhaling memory itself. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just old pipes or maybe some animal nesting nearby. But the longer I stood there, the stronger it became, wrapping around me like invisible smoke. The silence pressed down harder than the smell. In the desert, even quiet is alive, crickets, coyotes, the wind. But this park had none of that. It was like stepping into a vacuum. My boots scraped the pavement, and the sound didn't echo. It just died. That's when I noticed the first whisper. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. More like a vibration just under the threshold of sound, the kind that makes your eardrums twitch without your permission. At first, I thought it was the Volkswagen cooling down, metal popping in the night air. But when I turned back, the van was silent. The vibration was coming from the office. I told myself it was nothing. Just air moving through broken walls. But my legs carried me closer anyway, until I was standing in front of the doorframe. The wood was splintered, and my flashlight beam swept across peeling wallpaper and a corkboard still pinned with postcards. Greetings from Arizona. Greetings from Colorado. Families had mailed these once, back when stopping here meant being part of something. But now they hung limp, edges curled, as though even paper had grown tired of waiting. I stepped inside, my boots crunching glass. The vibration grew sharper, almost tonal, like a breath caught between words. My light passed over the desk and landed on something behind it, a guest log. Its cover was cracked, but it had been left open, pen still resting across the page. And here's where I wish I could tell you my memory lied, that the desert played tricks on my tired eyes. But the ink was fresh. Not decades old, not faded. Fresh. The last name written was Daniel. My name. My hand froze on the edge of the desk. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't touched that pen. I stood there staring, trying to rationalize it. Maybe another Daniel had signed it years ago and the ink had been preserved by the dry air. Maybe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The handwriting wasn't just familiar. It was mine. The vibration turned into something clearer then, a whisper. And this time I heard it as plain as the desert sky. Stay. I staggered back, nearly tripping over a chair. My light bounced across the walls, catching on old photographs, smiling families under sunshades, kids splashing in inflatable pools, couples grilling burgers at picnic tables. Every face seemed to stare at me, their smiles sharp now, stretched too wide. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. The whisper didn't stop. Stay. Stay. When I finally broke free and stumbled back outside, the night had shifted. The moon hung higher, whiter, and the air was colder than it had any right to be. My Volkswagen looked different too. Parked at a slight angle, I didn't remember leaving it. I gripped the handle and slid inside, heart pounding so hard I thought the whole desert would hear it. I turned the ignition. Nothing. The engine didn't even cough. I tried again, pumping the gas. Still nothing. And then I heard it, not from the office this time, but from all around me. From the trailers, from the cracked pavement, from the weeds that brushed against my tires. A chorus of whispers, dozens of voices, all folding over each other in a single demand. Stay. I don't remember making the decision to slam my fist against the steering wheel, but I did. My palm stung, and then the engine roared to life as though it had been waiting for that strike. I didn't wait to think. I shifted into reverse, tires screeching against gravel, headlights slicing through the dark as I backed away from that cursed loop. As I pulled onto the dirt road, the whispers followed me, fading, but still there, brushing against the glass of the windows like fingertips dragging across skin. I didn't stop driving until I hit pavement again, until the desert opened up into emptiness and the only sound left was the blood rushing through my ears. But I couldn't shake the memory of that logbook. My name, written in my own hand, waiting for me before I ever arrived. The road stretched endlessly that night, a ribbon of pale asphalt cutting across a desert that felt more like an ocean than land. My headlights carved a small cocoon of safety ahead of me, but everything outside that light was unknown, swallowing, infinite. I drove with both hands clenched tight on the wheel, not daring to glance into the mirrors. I was afraid I'd see something sitting in the back seat, some reflection that wasn't mine, staring back with the same too-wide smile I'd seen on those photos pinned to the wall inside the office. After an hour, I finally pulled over on a turnout. The Volkswagen hummed low, engine ticking with the strain of the sprint I'd forced on it. I leaned back in the driver's seat, trying to calm my breathing, but the desert wouldn't let me. It pulsed around me, the stillness too deep, as if the entire world were holding its breath. I reached instinctively for my phone, but there was no signal, no lifeline, just the thin glow of the battery screen reflecting my tired eyes. Sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, it dragged me under like a riptide. I dreamt of the guest log again. The pages flipped backward this time, names scrolling in reverse, all written in that same handwriting, mine. Every page, every line, every decade. Children's names, couples, entire families, all scrawled in my looping letters, and each one ended with the same command beneath it, stay. I woke up with sweat chilling my skin, my shirt stuck to my chest, and the taste of sand dry in my mouth. The Volkswagen's windows were fogged from my breath, but when I wiped them clear, I froze. On the windshield, traced in condensation from the inside, were words written with a fingertip. You came back. I didn't remember writing them. I didn't want to believe I had. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I had scrawled it in a half-asleep haze, trying to make sense of the dream. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, turning fear into evidence. But then I saw the condensation still dripping, fresh. And I knew. I left New Mexico the next morning, driving straight north without a plan, without even knowing where I wanted to end up. I told myself I'd forget sunny sands, that the desert had a way of bending perception, of making you see things that weren't there. But denial only works until the next shadow creeps in. Because that wasn't the last abandoned RV park I found. Over the years, they kept appearing. Not on maps, not on GPS, always just beyond the main road, like they were waiting for me. And each one had the same feeling. The silence too heavy, the air too thick, and the unmistakable sense that I was intruding on something unfinished. In Arizona, I stumbled onto a park called Silver Arrow. The sign was almost swallowed by mesquite, and the gates sagged open like a mouth with missing teeth. The spaces were still numbered, paint flaking on the asphalt. The office there had collapsed, roof caved in, but when I stepped inside, there was a mirror leaning against the wall, cracked down the center. My flashlight caught my reflection, but it didn't move the way I did. For a second, it's burned into me still. I saw myself raise my hand a beat too late, like I was a half second behind myself, like the me inside the glass had been waiting, watching, and only then decided to follow. I smashed that mirror with a rock and ran back to my van. But the crack of glass didn't end inside the office. It echoed, far away, like something else had broken out there in the desert at the same time. In Nevada, I found another park. This one still had the old neon sign, tubes bent in the shape of a palm tree, though no electricity ran to it. Starview RV Resort. The stars were bright that night, unnaturally so, the Milky Way spilling across the sky like frost. I parked to stretch my legs, and that's when I realized every single window of the trailers was covered from the inside with newspaper. Different dates, different years, but all with headlines that seemed wrong. Wars that never happened, obituaries for names I'd never heard. I pressed my palm against one of the windows just to prove it was real, and on the other side, something pressed back. That night I didn't sleep at all. I drove until dawn, my headlights chasing the road like I was being hunted. People sometimes ask me why I keep going back. Why, after the first time, after the second, I don't just avoid every dirt road, every crooked sign pointing to a campground that shouldn't exist. The truth is complicated. Fear hooks into you, sure, but so does curiosity. These places call to me. They whisper in ways I can't ignore. And maybe in some buried corner of my mind, I think if I decode their secrets, I'll find out why they know me before I arrive. But the cost of that curiosity keeps climbing. Last summer, in Colorado, I found one more. I hadn't planned to. I was just cutting across the Rockies, avoiding the main tourist roads when the Volkswagen's engine sputtered and forced me to pull over. The breakdown left me near an overgrown trail, and when I followed it on foot, I found the remains of yet another RV park tucked deep in the trees. This one felt different. There was no sign, no name, just rows of moss-covered pads, hookups rusted to orange dust, and trailers collapsed like ribs after a long burial. The forest had begun reclaiming it, roots cracking the pavement, branches pushing through broken windows. But as wild as it looked, there was still a shape, an order, like the land itself remembered what it had been. And in the center stood a circle of fire pits. Dozens of them. Perfectly aligned, as though every camper here had once been drawn into the same ritual flame. I crouched down at one of them, brushing aside damp leaves, and found charcoal that wasn't ancient. It still stained my fingers black. Someone had used these pits recently. My heart stuttered. This place should have been gone for decades, forgotten like all the others. But the coals said otherwise. Someone else had been here. That night, I didn't leave. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I wanted answers. Or maybe the whispers had finally convinced me. I parked the van on one of the old pads, the forest pressing in tight, and waited. When darkness settled, it came thick, like the trees were squeezing out every last drop of light. The forest around me went silent, as though even the animals refused to enter. And then I heard it, the crackle of fire. Not from my sight, from the circle. One by one, the pits began to glow. Flames rising, unsteady, orange light flickering across the skeletal trailers. I watched from my window, breath fogging the glass, as shapes began to move around them. People, families, children, their forms translucent, blurred like smoke. They gathered at the flames, hands outstretched, rack faces calm. I should have been terrified. And I was. But there was something else too, an ache, a pull. They looked like travelers who had finally found rest, who had been waiting for me to sit down with them. The whispers came again, softer this time, more tender. Stay. You belong here. For the first time, I wanted to. I opened the van door, the night air heavy with the scent of wood smoke, even though nothing physical burned. My legs carried me toward the circle, toward the warmth that wasn't warmth at all, but memory. And just as I reached the edge of the firelight, every figure turned in unison. Their faces blurred, shifting until they were all mine. I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven pavement, heart slamming against my ribs. The figures didn't move. They just stared, my own face reflected a dozen times over, mouths curling into the same too-wide smile. And together they whispered in perfect harmony, "You've always been here." I didn't sleep that night in Colorado. Not after the circle. Not after those faces, my faces, stared back through the firelight. I sat behind the locked doors of the Volkswagen until the first gray of dawn crept between the trees. My eyes never closed, my body coiled in a tension that felt like it would snap bone if I let it. And even when morning came, the circle of fire pits looked ordinary again. Cold, ash-filled, empty. It should have been over. I could have turned the key, started the van, and driven away, adding this place to the growing catalog of memories I never wanted but could never forget. But something made me stay just a little longer. A sick kind of gravity. I told myself I needed proof. Evidence that it wasn't just exhaustion twisting my mind. So I walked back to the circle. The pits were cold, blackened stones scattered with damp leaves. But in the center of the circle, carved deep into the concrete pad, was a symbol I hadn't seen the night before. A spiral. Perfectly etched, grooves clean as if made yesterday, its lines curling inward toward a single point. I crouched over it, my stomach twisting. The spiral wasn't just carved, it was familiar. I'd seen it before, in sunny sands, scratched into the desk under the guest logbook. I'd seen it in Starview too, faintly painted on one of the newspaper-covered windows. At the time, I had dismissed it as coincidence. Now I knew better. These places weren't random. They were connected. I left Colorado that morning, but the spiral followed me. Not physically, though part of me kept checking the van's walls for marks I hadn't made. No, it followed in thought, in dreams. I saw it every time I closed my eyes. It spun slowly, pulling me inward, dragging me toward that single point at the center where silence waited like a mouth. For weeks, I tried to fight it. I told myself I'd stick to regular campgrounds, the kind filled with life, families laughing, dogs barking, kids racing bikes between sites. Places where silence had no chance to grow teeth. But even in those parks, I'd catch glimpses. A shadow of an old sign leaning at the edge of the lot. A trailer window reflecting my face a half-second late. The spiral etched into tree bark where no hand should have reached. I realized then that the abandoned parks weren't places you found. They found you. It was late autumn when I ended up in Oregon, driving along the coast. The air was damp, salty, clinging to the inside of my lungs with every breath. I was exhausted, half delirious from lack of real sleep, when I saw it, a faded billboard half swallowed by vines. Shoreline Haven RV Resort. The paint was chipped, the wood sagging, but beneath it the spiral was clear, carved deep into the signpost itself. I told myself I wouldn't stop. I'd pass by, push on until I reached some town with lights and people and noise, but my hands betrayed me. They turned the wheel. They steered me down the narrow road toward the trees. Shoreline Haven was perched on the edge of a bluff, the ocean stretching black and endless beyond it. The sites were lined in rows overlooking the water, each one marked by rotting picnic tables and collapsed awnings. The air smelled sharp, briny, and beneath it something sour, like algae left too long in the sun. The waves crashed far below, steady and rhythmic, but didn't soothe. It sounded like breathing. Slow. Intentional. I parked near the old bathhouse. Its door creaked when I pushed it open, hinges moaning like they remembered every hand that had ever pulled them. Inside, the mirrors were shattered, pieces scattered across the floor, and on every fragment of glass in the reflected slivers, I saw myself. Dozens of me, each one slightly different, one smiling too wide, one staring with hollow eyes, one whispering though I couldn't hear the words. I staggered back outside, but the ocean wasn't any kinder. Out on the horizon, I saw lights, not ships, too steady, too symmetrical. They glowed in a line like lanterns bobbing above the water, and then one by one they winked out, leaving only the sound of waves filling the silence they left behind. I should have run. I should have turned the key and left Shoreline Haven in the rear view. But I stayed. Because by then, I'd stopped pretending I was just a victim of curiosity. The truth was harder. I needed to know why these places called me. That night, I set up a recorder in the van. Just a simple handheld thing, the kind I used for notes on the road. I wanted to catch the whispers, to prove to myself they weren't only in my head. I hit record, set it on the dashboard, and waited. At first, all I caught was the ocean, the slow rhythm of the surf. But after midnight, the air shifted. My skin prickled, and the van seemed to lean subtly toward the bluff, as though gravity itself was bending. And then the whispers began. Not soft this time, not hidden beneath silence. Clear. Dozens of voices, overlapping, rising and falling like the tide. I leaned closer to the recorder, heart hammering, but as I listened, I realized something that nearly stopped my breath. Every voice was mine. Whispering, pleading, commanding, begging. Stay. You belong here. You've always been here. Layer after layer of my own voice, not just the tone, but the rhythm, the hesitations, the flaws I recognized too well. It wasn't like hearing myself on a recording. It was like hearing myself multiplied into a chorus of inevitability. I shut the recorder off and buried it under a pile of blankets, but it was too late. The words had already sunk their hooks in. The rest of that night blurred. I remember standing at the edge of the bluff, the ocean roaring below, the spiral etched into the soil at my feet. I remember hearing footsteps behind me, though no one was there. And I remember the overwhelming certainty that if I jumped, if I let the ocean swallow me, I would wake up in another abandoned RV park, another spiral, another whisper. Because that's what the voices wanted me to understand. These places weren't separate, they were one. Different faces, different shells, but the same heart beating beneath them all. A network of silence threaded across the country, each abandoned park another doorway into the same endless memory. And somehow, I was part of it. By dawn, I was back in the van, shaking, exhausted but alive. The recorder was gone, not misplaced, gone. The blankets were undisturbed, but the device was no longer there. I didn't need to hear the playback anyway. I already knew what it would have said. By the time I left Oregon, I knew I was unraveling. The road stretched in front of me like a lifeline, but every mile felt thinner, like a thread fraying under too much strain. I told myself if I just kept driving, if I kept moving, maybe I could outrun it. The spirals, the whispers, the faces that weren't quite mine. But you can't outrun something that's inside you. The Volkswagen became my coffin on wheels. The silence followed me into it. I started hearing the whispers even when I was parked in crowded campgrounds, even when families camped nearby with their fires crackling and laughter cutting through the night. It would start small, under the edge of sound, like static beneath music. Then when I closed my eyes, it would swell until it drowned everything else out. Always the same demand: stay. One night in Idaho, I woke to find the spiral drawn in condensation on the van window. I had slept with my face inches from the glass, breath fogging against it, and yet the lines weren't mine. They curved too perfectly, too clean, ending in a sharp center point that pressed like an eye staring back at me. I wiped it away, only to see it reappear seconds later, traced from the outside this time. I didn't open the door to check. I couldn't. By Montana, I had stopped sleeping altogether. The bags under my eyes sank deep, my hands trembled when I held the wheel, and every shadow at the edge of my headlights looked like it wanted to step closer. The Volkswagen rattled like it sensed it too, like the machine itself was warning me to turn back, though to where I couldn't say. It was outside Helena where things broke. I had pulled into a rest stop late at night, too exhausted to keep going, but too afraid to risk a motel. The lot was empty, except for one other vehicle, a battered RV parked at the far edge, its windows dark. I told myself it was safe, that someone else nearby would keep the night from collapsing in on me. I reclined the seat, closed my eyes, and let my body finally give in. When I woke, it was still dark. Too dark. My phone screen read 3:12 a.m., and the world outside the windows felt wrong. Not quiet. Hollow. I sat up, every hair on my arms raised. The other RV was gone. The lot was empty, the night pressing thick as tar. I reached for the keys, but froze. On the pavement outside, illuminated faintly by the Volkswagen's dome light, the spiral was drawn in chalk. Perfect. crisp, fresh. My pulse hammered in my throat. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to remind myself I was just tired, delirious, imagining connections that weren't there. But then I saw the second spiral, and the third, and the fourth. The entire rest stop was covered. Spirals overlapping, curling into each other, spreading across the pavement like veins of some ancient disease. And in the center of the largest one, directly in front of my van, sat the recorder I had lost in Oregon. I don't know how I opened the door. My body moved before my mind could stop it. The night air bit cold against my skin, and the spirals stretched beneath my boots as if they had grown there, alive instead of drawn. I crouched, trembling, and picked up the recorder. It was warm. Too warm, like it had been held in someone's palm only seconds before. I pressed play. The sound that filled the lot wasn't static. It wasn't whispers. It was screaming. My voice, ragged, tearing, begging for release. Dozens of me, hundreds overlapping, screaming until the air itself vibrated with the weight of it. And underneath, like a thread through the chaos, the single word repeated over and over: stay, stay, stay. I dropped the recorder. It cracked against the pavement, but the sound didn't stop. The screaming kept pouring out, louder now, until the spirals themselves seemed to throb in time with it. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound pressed straight into my skull, bypassing everything I tried to block. I staggered backward, tripped, fell hard against the van. My breath came fast, shallow, and the world spun like I was standing in the center of a whirlpool. Then the headlights of another car cut through the lot. A semi pulled in, brakes hissing, and the spell broke. The spirals faded. The recorder went silent. The lot was just asphalt again, blank and ordinary. I scrambled into the van and tore out of that rest stop without looking back. But the panic didn't fade. It rode with me, strapped into the passenger seat, whispering into my ear even as the highway carried me forward. For days, I barely ate. My hands shook so badly. I had to grip the wheel with both just to keep steady. I tried telling myself I would stop chasing the abandoned parks, stop following roads that didn't appear on maps, but it was already too late. The spirals weren't waiting for me anymore. They were following. That became clear in North Dakota. I had parked near a lake, trying to rest. The water was still, the air heavy with the smell of algae and wet earth. I stood on the shore, staring at my reflection, when ripples began to spread outward. Not from a fish, not from wind, from me. My reflection didn't match my movements anymore. When I raised my hand, it waved before I did. When I stepped back, it leaned closer. And then the ripples formed the spiral, curling outward across the water until the entire lake was turning. I stumbled back to the van, slammed the door, and refused to look at the water again. But that night, when I finally closed my eyes, I dreamt of drowning, not flailing, not fighting, just sinking. Calm, still. And at the bottom of the lake, dozens of Volkswagens sat rusting, each one identical to mine. And inside every one, I sat slumped at the wheel, eyes open, mouth forming the same word: stay. I woke gasping, lungs burning as though I had truly swallowed water. My throat was raw, my chest tight, but the van was dry, too dry. Dust coated my tongue, the air inside hot and brittle. My body ached as though something had been pressing down on me all night, holding me still. I started the engine, but the panic didn't leave. It sat in my gut, deep and heavy, telling me that no matter how far I drove, no matter how many miles I put between myself and the last spiral, I was already circling, already trapped. The question wasn't if I would find the next abandoned park. It was when. By winter, the roads blurred together. I'd lost track of what state I was in most days. Just asphalt, trees, desert, repeat. The Volkswagen rattled with each mile like it knew the weight of what I carried inside. My reflection in the side mirror grew stranger to me. Hollow-eyed, lips moving even when I wasn't speaking. More than once, I caught myself mouthing the word stay without realizing it. The spirals weren't waiting in the corners anymore. They were everywhere, etched into frost on the windshield, formed in the swirl of coffee grounds at the bottom of my cup, pressed into the lines of my palm as though the skin itself remembered. Each time I tried to ignore them, they found another way back. I told myself I'd go east, toward the plains, the small towns, places where abandoned parks might be rarer. Maybe the emptiness of farmland would break the pattern. But the first night I crossed into Minnesota, I found one again. The road bent me toward it without permission, headlights landing on a rusted gate half buried in snow. The sign was so weather-worn the letters had almost disappeared, but I could just make out the words, Lake Pines RV Campground. My stomach turned. Pines surrounded the entire entrance, dark columns rising into a sky heavy with clouds. The snow swallowed the sound of my tires as I rolled past the gate, and already I knew I wasn't alone. The sites lay buried under drifts, electrical hookups sticking out like broken teeth. The office was a squat wooden cabin, roof sagging beneath ice, and there, across the snow, prints led from one trailer to another. Human prints. Fresh. I parked, shut off the engine, and listened. The silence here wasn't empty. It was waiting. The kind of silence that breathes with you, that leans in when your heartbeat grows too loud. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. The snow crunched under my boots, and the sound seemed to echo too far, as if the trees themselves were carrying it deeper into the dark. I followed the prints. They wound between trailers, through collapsed awnings, toward the bathhouse at the far end of the loop. The door was cracked open and black inside. I pushed it wider, my flashlight trembling across tile walls stained with mildew. The prints ended here, vanishing into the shadow. Then I saw it. On the wall, carved into the tile with something sharp, was the spiral. Deeper this time, gouged into the stone, curling inward until the grooves almost cut through. My beam traced it and my body tilted forward. My pulse slowed. My breath fell into rhythm with the spiral's endless curve. I don't know how long I stood there, seconds, hours. Time collapsed into the pattern, pulling me closer. My hand rose unbidden to trace the grooves. The tile was cold, slick beneath my fingers, and as soon as I touched it, the whispers swelled. Not outside, not in the air, inside me. You're already here. You've always been here. I staggered back, flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam spun, catching on the mirrors above the sinks, and in those mirrors stood people. Dozens. Some in camping clothes, some in pajamas, some in uniforms from decades past, all staring, and every single face was mine. Their mouths opened, and the whisper became a roar. Stay. I bolted. Out the door, across the snow, back to the van. My boots slid, my lungs burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop until the driver's side slammed shut behind me. The Volkswagen roared to life without hesitation, as though even the machine wanted me gone. I tore through the gate, snow spraying behind me, the mirrors filled with nothing but trees. But the faces didn't leave. They stayed imprinted on the backs of my eyes. Every time I blinked, I saw them. Dozens of me, pleading, commanding, waiting. That night, I drove until my body nearly shut down. When I finally pulled over on the shoulder of a frozen road, I collapsed against the wheel. My chest heaved, breath fogging the air. I told myself I'd keep moving at dawn, that I wouldn't let the spiral win. But exhaustion is its own kind of surrender, and that's when the dream came. I was back at the circle in Colorado, fire pits glowing, figures gathered, but this time I stepped into the light. I sat at the fire, and when I looked across at the others, they weren't blurred anymore. They were me. All of them. Each one another version of myself, some older, some younger, some broken, some smiling. They leaned forward in unison, their voices rising together. You never left. You only thought you did. I woke screaming, hands clawing at the steering wheel, lungs raw. The Volkswagen sat silent, engine off, road empty. My chest ached as if the dream had wrung me dry, and in the frost on the inside of the windshield, the spiral had formed again. But this time, in its center, one word was carved. Home. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Something inside me cracked then, not in fear, but in realization. Maybe they weren't asking me to stay in one park. Maybe all of them, every abandoned place I'd stumbled into, were pieces of the same home, a home I'd been circling my entire life. The panic shifted into something worse. Resignation. Because what if they were right? What if every mile I thought I'd driven away only drew me deeper into the spiral? By the time I reached Wisconsin, I couldn't fight the thought anymore. My hands shook less, my fear dulled, not because I was safe, but because the voice inside me had grown too familiar. It no longer sounded separate. It sounded like me. I pulled off onto a side road, snow still falling, and saw another crooked sign half hidden by branches. I didn't even read it this time. I didn't need to. I knew what waited beyond. The Volkswagen rolled forward on its own quiet rhythm, tires crunching the snow, the night leaning in like it had been expecting me. My reflection in the window smiled back, lips forming a word before I did. Stay. Snow whispered against the windshield as the Volkswagen crawled deeper into the trees. The road wasn't marked, but I didn't need signs anymore. My gut already knew where it led. It always did. The spirals weren't waiting to be found now. They were steering. I felt it in the pull of the wheel beneath my palms, in the steady rhythm of the tires over ice. The campground appeared suddenly, as though the forest had split to reveal it. And in a way, maybe it had. The sign over the entrance had fallen, half buried in snow, its paint long gone. I couldn't read the name, and it didn't matter. I knew what it was. Another fragment of the same whole, another doorway into the silence. The sights were skeletal. Old trailers sagged under the weight of snow, doors cracked open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Electrical boxes leaned, paint bubbling with rust, wires dangling like veins. The bathhouse was nothing but a collapsed roof under the weight of winter. I parked on one of the cracked pads, engine humming low. The van should have rattled like always, but tonight it didn't. Tonight it purred, steady, like it too had stopped resisting. I sat there, hands loose on the wheel, and waited for the fear. Waited for the tremble in my gut, for the whisper to start. But it didn't feel like before. This silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't waiting. It was welcoming. And that terrified me more than anything else. I stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath my boots, cold biting through the seams, but the night wasn't unbearable. It was calm, almost soft. I walked between the trailers, flashlight beams skating across warped windows, and realized I didn't feel watched. I felt expected. The spiral was there, of course, etched into the snow itself, curling across the entire loop of the campground. Perfectly drawn, no footprints leading to or from it. It just was, as if the land itself had formed it while no one was looking. I followed it without hesitation, my boots carrying me around its curling lines, deeper, until I reached the center. There, waiting in the snow, sat the recorder, the same one I had lost, the same one I had seen in Montana. Its little red light blinked. Recording. I bent down, my breath fogging in the cold, and picked it up. My fingers closed around the plastic, warm again like before. I pressed stop, then play. This time there wasn't screaming. There wasn't even whispering. There was only a voice. My voice. Steady. Calm. Certain. "You've come home, Daniel." I dropped it into the snow. My chest heaved, breath burning the back of my throat. But I couldn't deny the relief that washed through me, sharp and sudden, like cool water after days of thirst. Home. Maybe that's what I'd been chasing across the miles. Not safety, not escape, just the place where the spirals finally ended. But then something shifted. I looked up, and in the windows of every trailer, lights flickered on. Not the harsh buzz of fluorescent bulbs, not the orange glow of old lamps. Firelight, warm, alive. Curtains swayed as though people moved inside, and for a moment I could almost hear it. Laughter, the clink of dishes, the strum of a guitar. A life I hadn't lived in years. I stumbled back, blinking snow from my lashes. The campground wasn't dead anymore. It was alive. Families at their tables, kids chasing each other across the loops, couples leaning close under awnings. And every face was mine. Not distorted this time, not blurred. Just me, multiplied 100 times over, living all the lives I never had. One of me crouched to tie a child's bootlace. Another flipped a burger on a rusted grill. Another leaned back in a lawn chair, beer in hand, laughing into the firelight. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. For a heartbeat, I wanted it. Wanted to step forward, to sink into one of those lives, to forget the endless road and the silence and the fear. But then the voices began again. Not whispers, not screams. A chorus, layered and full, rising from every trailer, every fire, every version of me. Stay, stay, stay. I clutched my head, dropped to my knees in the snow. The sound wasn't outside, it was inside, vibrating in my teeth, rattling my ribs. Each voice pressed against me like a wave, drowning thought. Stay. This is what you wanted. This is who you are. My nails scraped through my hair, fingers digging into my scalp. I shouted just to hear my own voice over theirs, but it vanished into the swell. My lungs heaved, chest seizing, and I realized then how thin the line was between surrender and obliteration. I stumbled to my feet and ran. Not toward the van at first, just anywhere. Away from the spiral, away from the lights, away from the lives that weren't mine. Snow bit into my legs, branches tore at my arms, but I kept moving until my body collapsed against the Volkswagen's door. I wrenched it open, fell inside, and slammed the lock with shaking hands. The van sat silent. No purr, no hum, just silence. I leaned against the wheel, chest heaving, tears hot against frozen skin. For the first time in months, I felt alone again. And the loneliness was almost worse, because I realized then I didn't know which was real anymore. The endless road, the empty parks, or the firelit campground where I had 100 other lives waiting. And worse, I didn't know which one I wanted. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught, rumbling low. My headlights cut through the snow, pale beams carving into the dark. I pressed my forehead against the wheel, trying to steady my breath. The spiral had given me two choices: surrender to the life it offered, or keep running until the road finally folded back on itself and dropped me at another gate. Neither felt like escape. The question wasn't if I would end up back here. The question was how many times I already had. The highway blurred beneath the Volkswagen's tires, black ribbons stretching forever under a sky smeared gray with winter clouds. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but it wasn't control that kept me driving. It was fear of stopping, because I knew the moment I let the van rest, the spiral would rise again. Sleep clawed at me in ragged bursts. My eyes burned, lids heavy, every blink threatening to pull me under. But every time my head dipped forward, I jolted awake, heart pounding, certain that if I closed my eyes for more than a second, I'd wake up parked in another forgotten campground, spiral curling beneath the tires. The road signs blurred by, towns I barely registered, exits I ignored, all meaningless. The road itself felt like it wasn't carrying me anywhere new, just circling, looping, bending me back toward something I couldn't see but could feel pressing closer with every mile. By nightfall, snow began again, thick flakes swirling through the beams of my headlights. My breath fogged the cabin, hands numb against the wheel. When the Volkswagen's fuel gauge dipped toward empty, I had no choice but to pull into a gas station. It was old, half abandoned, only one pump still lit, the others standing dead-eyed in the snow. The shop windows were dark, shelves inside stripped bare. I killed the engine, stepped out into the bitter wind, and filled the tank with shaking hands. The pump clicked off, and in that silence I heard it again. The faint vibration, the whisper beneath sound. I turned. The snow behind the station had been cleared, flattened into an open space, and carved across the lot, precise and unbroken, was the spiral. It wasn't possible. I'd only just pulled in. No footprints, no marks of tools, just the spiral, perfect, curling into itself, waiting. My chest seized. The pump nozzle slipped from my hand, clattering against the frozen ground. I scrambled back into the van, slamming the door hard enough the window rattled. My breath came fast, fogging the glass, and I turned the key with desperate force. The engine coughed, stuttered. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't start. Then, with a shudder, it caught, rumbling low. I pulled away from that station as fast as I dared, tires skidding on the snow. My heart hammered so loud it drowned the engine. The spiral was following me now, not just waiting in forgotten places, but bleeding into every stop, every corner, every mile. By dawn, exhaustion had dragged me to the edge of reason. My reflection in the side mirror didn't even try to hide anymore. Its mouth moved freely now, whispering words I couldn't hear but didn't need to. I knew what it was saying. Stay. I tried blasting music to drown it out, anything to keep my mind tethered. But no matter the station, no matter the track, I heard it beneath the sound. My own voice, layered, harmonizing with itself until the lyrics bent into the same command. Stay. That afternoon, somewhere in Michigan, I broke. I don't remember pulling off the road. One moment I was gripping the wheel, the next the van was parked in the lot of yet another abandoned park. The sign this time was shattered, letters unreadable, but I didn't need them. The air told me where I was. Heavy, still, waiting. I staggered out, boots crunching frost, and walked the cracked loop. My hands shook, my breath shallow, but the spiral had already drawn itself in the center of the lot, curling wide and deep. I stood at its edge, staring down, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But another voice rose louder inside me, the one that sounded like relief. If I stepped in, maybe it would end. No more running, no more whispers, no more mirrors and reflections and faces that weren't mine. Just stillness, just home. My foot lifted, and then something inside me snapped. A flash of rage so sharp it cut through the haze, through the resignation that had been growing inside me like rot. Rage not at the spiral, rage at myself. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the pattern, scooped up a jagged rock, and slammed it into the asphalt. Again and again. I carved jagged lines across the perfect grooves, breaking the spiral into chaos. My breath came in ragged gasps, arms shaking, sweat freezing on my neck, but I didn't stop until the pattern was ruined, cut through, unrecognizable. The silence shattered. The whispers didn't beg this time. They screamed. 1,000 of my voices, raw and furious, filling the air like a storm, tearing through metal. My reflection in the van's window, twisted, mouth wide, teeth bared, howling a sound that rattled the glass. I staggered back, rock slipping from my hand, ears ringing. The ground trembled beneath my boots, a low vibration crawling up through the pavement into my bones. The ruined spiral pulsed, light leaking from its broken lines, bright white searing against the snow. And then, darkness. The light collapsed in on itself, vanishing as if it had never been. The ground stilled. The whispers cut off mid-scream. Silence fell, deeper than before, so heavy it pressed the breath from my lungs. I stood there shaking, the ruined spiral at my feet, my body drained, my heart hammering. For the first time in months, there were no voices. No whispers, no faces staring back. But I didn't feel free. I felt watched. Every trailer window stared blank and black, and though nothing moved behind them, I knew something had shifted. The spiral wasn't gone. It was waiting, biding, and now I had defied it. I stumbled back into the van, slammed the door, and gripped the wheel with bloodied hands. My reflection in the window looked pale, eyes too wide, but for the first time it didn't move on its own. It moved with me. I drove out of that campground like the road itself was on fire, tires skidding, engines screaming, heart trying to claw its way out of my chest. And though the silence had followed me, though the spiral was still etched into the backs of my eyes, I felt something else now. I felt hunted. For a while after Michigan, I convinced myself I'd broken something, that by shattering the spiral with my own hands, I had cut the thread binding me to those places. The road ahead felt clearer, the air lighter. My reflection no longer mouthed words I couldn't hear. At night, when I closed my eyes, the silence held, empty, but finally mine. But freedom is never that simple. It began subtly, like the spiral was learning new ways to reach me. Road signs shifted when I passed them, letters rearranging into words that weren't there for anyone else. Stay, come back, home. At gas stations, people looked at me strangely, like they recognized me, even though we'd never met. More than once, I caught a stranger watching me pump fuel, their head cocked at an angle too sharp, lips moving silently in unison with mine. And the mirrors. God, the mirrors. They stopped showing my face at all. Just the spiral, etched deep into the glass, spinning slowly until my stomach turned. By the time I hit Ohio, I knew my act of rebellion hadn't severed the spiral's grip. It had only provoked it. The storm came that night. Thick rain slashing across the highway, wipers smearing water into streaks. The Volkswagen groaned against the wind, headlights barely cutting the dark. I'd been driving for hours, eyes raw, every nerve stretched thin when the engine sputtered. Once, twice, then died. I coasted to the shoulder, heart hammering. The storm swallowed the world outside, thunder cracking, lightning burning white across the sky. I turned the key again. Nothing. Again, still nothing. The van was dead. And then I saw them, headlights ahead through the rain, dozens of them, not moving. Parked across the field beyond the road, old RVs, campers, trailers, all lined in rows, their outlines blurred by the downpour. For a second, I thought they were just junk, some forgotten storage yard. But then the lights flicked on, every single one. The field glowed white in the rain, and silhouettes moved inside each trailer, people shifting at windows, curtains swaying. My breath caught in my throat. Even through the storm, I knew those faces. Mine. I slammed the lock on the van door, hands shaking. Lightning lit the field again, brighter this time, and I saw the pattern spread across the mud, the spiral. Huge. So large it spanned the entire lot of trailers, curling outward until its edges brushed against the highway itself. The storm roared louder, wind slamming against the Volkswagen, but beneath it I heard the voices. Clear, rising above thunder, above rain, above the blood in my ears. You can't break it, Daniel. You are it. The headlights of the trailers flared brighter, beams cutting into the storm until they converged on me, flooding the van with white. I shielded my eyes, but the light pressed through skin, through bone, burning its way in until all I could see was the spiral, spinning faster, pulling me inward. I screamed. Not in fear this time, but in rage. My fists slammed the wheel, the dash, the window, desperate for something to shatter. Anything to prove I was still separate, still real. And then the engine coughed. I snapped the key forward. The Volkswagen roared back to life, louder than I'd ever heard it, shaking on its rusted frame like a beast waking from hibernation. Headlights cut through the storm, slicing into the field, and in an instant, the spirals, the trailers, the faces, all of it vanished. Only mud remained, rain churning the ground into sludge. I didn't wait. I floored the pedal, tires spinning, mud spattering the sides of the van as I tore back onto the highway. My chest heaved, my vision blurred with tears I didn't feel fall, but I kept driving, faster, faster, the van rattling like it would come apart beneath me. And still, I couldn't shake their words. You are it. The thought burrowed deep, gnawing at me long after the storm passed. If the spiral wasn't just chasing me, if it wasn't just trying to trap me, what if it was something worse? What if it was me? That night, when I finally pulled into a rest stop to catch my breath, I sat trembling behind the wheel, too afraid to close my eyes. The silence pressed in, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, full of something vast and patient, waiting for me to finally understand. I looked at my hands on the wheel, bloodied knuckles from where I'd pounded against the dashboard, and there, faint and raw, carved into the skin across my palm, was the spiral. Not drawn, not burned. Carved. My stomach lurched. I rubbed at it, clawed at it, tried to wipe it away, but the lines were too deep, too precise. They hadn't been cut from outside. They had risen, grown like veins surfacing under skin. And when I traced them with a shaking fingertip, the whispers returned, not around me, not outside, but inside, curling up from the marrow itself. You never defied us. You only revealed yourself. I dropped my hand, chest heaving. My reflection in the windshield leaned closer, eyes wild, mouth curling into that too-wide smile I had seen in so many broken windows before. And this time, I knew it wasn't the spiral watching me. It was me. The lines in my palm didn't fade. They deepened, darkened, until I couldn't tell if they were her or part of my flesh or something etched into the bone beneath. I wrapped my hand in a rag to block it from sight, but I still felt the spiral burning there, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Every throb whispered the same rhythm. Stay, stay, stay. I tried to fight it. I drove through the night, fueled by nothing but caffeine and fear, pushing the Volkswagen harder than I ever had. The van groaned, metal rattling in protest, but it carried me on, as though it too was bound to this endless race. Signs blurred by, towns appeared and disappeared, and still the road refused to change. Every exit felt familiar, every mile indistinguishable from the last. And then came the loop. It was somewhere in Pennsylvania, or maybe New York, I couldn't tell anymore. I had been driving for hours when I realized I had passed the same rusted billboard 3 times. Happy Trails RV Park. Its paint had peeled, its letters flaking, but the words were unmistakable. I tightened my grip on the wheel, refusing to believe it. Yet when the road bent again, the same sign stood waiting, leaning crooked into the fog. The spiral wasn't chasing me anymore. It was folding the world around me. By the 4th pass, I gave up pretending. I turned the wheel, following the dirt road beneath the billboard, and let the Volkswagen carry me into whatever waited. Happy Trails was anything but. The lot stretched wide, trailers slumped into the earth, their roofs buckled with rot. The air stank of mildew and rust, heavy enough to sting the back of my throat. Fog clung low, curling around the wheels of the van, wrapping me in its damp grip. I parked in the center of the loop and cut the engine. For the first time in months, silence settled clean. No whispers, no shifting reflections, just silence. And that was worse than anything, because silence meant expectation. I stepped outside, boots crunching gravel, and looked around. Every trailer window stared back, black and blank. The office door stood ajar, swaying gently as though it had just been opened. And at the center of the lot, carved deep into the asphalt, was the largest spiral I had ever seen. Wide enough to swallow the entire park, its grooves glistening wet as though freshly cut. My chest tightened. My body wanted to collapse, to sink into those grooves and let them pull me under. But I forced myself forward, every step a war, until I stood at its edge, and then the trailers lit up. Every window burst with light, pale and blinding, pouring out into the fog. Shadows moved inside, hundreds of them. Men, women, children. Each one turned toward me, faces pressed to glass, mouths moving in silent unison. My stomach dropped as I recognized them. All of them. Me. The lights flared brighter, and their voices spilled out at last, layered and deafening. You are the spiral. You are the park. You are the silence. Stop running. Come home. My knees buckled, palms pressed against the asphalt. The spiral in my hand throbbed so violently it felt like my skin would split. The voices surged, crashing over me like waves, drowning out thought, memory, self. I screamed just to hear something that belonged to me, but the sound warped, bent until it was only another voice in the chorus. Stay. The ground trembled beneath me. The spiral glowed, light bleeding from the cracks, curling into the fog like smoke. Trailers groaned, doors slamming open, and figures began stepping out. Dozens of them, hundreds, pouring into the lot, every face my own. They walked with perfect rhythm, eyes locked on me, mouths whispering in time with my pulse. I staggered back, but there was nowhere to go. The spiral stretched in every direction, its lines endless, its center yawning beneath my feet. The figures closed in, their bodies pale and blurred, their eyes black voids. And then one of them stepped forward. He was different, solid. His eyes weren't voids, they were mine. My reflection, perfect, standing across from me as though I'd finally stepped out of the glass. His lips curled into that too-wide smile I'd seen 100 times before. You can't fight yourself forever, he said. His voice was calm, steady, louder than the chorus behind him. This isn't a trap, Daniel. It's recognition. You are not a visitor. You are the reason these places exist. They are you, and you are them. That's why you always find them. That's why they always find you. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, I'm not. I'm not part of this. I'm just running. He finished for me. He stepped closer, the spiral glowing beneath his boots. But where do you think the road leads when it bends? Where do you think silence comes from when it falls? Who do you think writes your name in the logbooks before you arrive? My throat closed. The truth clawed at me, desperate to be heard. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to surrender, to finally stop fighting, to accept that every spiral, every whisper, every reflection wasn't hunting me. It was me. But another part still fought, small and trembling, buried deep in the marrow. The part that had smashed the spiral in Michigan. The part that refused to belong to silence. I forced myself to stand, legs shaking, breath ragged. If I am the spiral, I rasped, voice breaking, then I choose, and I choose not to stay. The reflection's smile faltered. For the first time, the voices behind him wavered. The glow dimmed, shadows flickering uncertainly. The spiral in my palm seared, lines burning hot enough to blister, but I clenched my fist tighter, refusing to let it dictate me. The reflection tilted his head. His smile returned, softer now, almost sad. "You'll come back," he whispered. "You always do. The road only bends one way." The figures dissolved, light collapsing into fog. The trailers went dark, windows blank once more, and in an instant, the lot was empty. I stood alone in the silence, chest heaving, hand raw and blistered, the spiral still carved deep into my palm. The Volkswagen waited, quiet, headlights dim in the mist. I climbed inside and turned the key. The engine caught, the road opened, and though I drove, though the highway stretched once more into the unknown, I couldn't shake the truth of his words. The road only bends one way. The highway stretched into dawn, pale light bleeding across the horizon. My eyes burned, my palms blistered, and every muscle in my body trembled from the confrontation. Yet the Volkswagen rolled steady, as if it too was relieved I'd chosen to keep moving. The road was quiet now, the silence no longer pressing, just empty. For the first time in months, I let myself believe I'd broken free. But freedom tastes different when you know it's temporary. Every mile was a question mark, every sign another dare, and behind my relief was a deeper truth. The spiral wasn't gone. It had only loosened its grip, waiting for me to forget, to falter, to choose the wrong road again. I drove for days, slept in parking lots, ate gas station food, ignored every dirt path, like every crooked sign that might lead to another forgotten place. My reflection returned to normal, or normal enough. No wide smiles, no whispered words, just a tired man in a tired van, holding himself together with caffeine and willpower. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I dreamt of happy trails. Not the ruined one I had stood in, but a version alive again. Fires burning, families gathered, children laughing as they ran between trailers, and every face still mine. Smiling. Content, whole. They weren't trapped, they were home. The spiral didn't cage them, it anchored them. I woke each time with tears on my face, because in the quiet after those dreams, the road didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like exile. One night, somewhere in West Virginia, I pulled the van onto a turnout overlooking the mountains. The air was damp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and the silence wrapped me like a blanket. I sat there for hours, headlights off, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the dark ridges against the sky. And I asked myself the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. What if staying wasn't surrender? What if all the running, all the fear, was the real mistake? The spiral had followed me across deserts, forests, lakes, mountains. No matter how far I drove, it bent the road back toward itself. And every time I touched it, every time I stood at its edge, I felt something undeniable. Belonging. My hand throbbed, the lines in my palm glowing faintly in the moonlight. I traced them without meaning to, following the curve inward, until my breath slowed, my chest eased, my mind stilled. The fear dissolved, replaced by something heavier. Acceptance. Maybe the spiral wasn't calling me to trap me. Maybe it was calling me home. The thought lingered as I sat there, the night stretching long. And when I finally started the van again, I didn't point it toward the highway. I turned down a smaller road instead, one that twisted into the woods. No sign, no name, just a path waiting. The Volkswagen rattled, headlights bouncing over cracked pavement, branches scraping the sides. And when the trees finally opened, I wasn't surprised to see them. Rows of pads, old electrical hookups, collapsed awnings, trailers sagging under moss and time. Another abandoned park, silent and waiting. I parked at the center, engine idling low. The spiral was there, of course, etched into the dirt, curling wide, perfect as ever. My pulse matched it, steady and calm. I stepped outside. The air was cool, damp with mist, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, though no fires burned. I walked to the spiral's edge, boots sinking into soft earth, and felt no resistance this time. just inevitability. The trailers lit one by one, windows glowing warm, curtains swaying, shadows moved inside. And when they turned toward me, I didn't flinch, because I knew what faces I'd see. Mine. They smiled, not wide, not warped, just gentle, welcoming, as if I'd finally arrived where I belonged. Their voices rose together, soft as wind through trees. Stay. I stepped forward. The spiral pulsed beneath my boots, light bleeding up through the soil, curling into my skin. My palm burned, the lines glowing bright, merging with the pattern at my feet. The ground vibrated, not violently this time, but like a heartbeat syncing with my own. I walked deeper, past the first curve, then the second, each step lighter, easier, the fear falling away like shed skin. The trailers blurred, faces merging into one endless reflection. The voices grew louder, filling my chest until my own voice joined without effort. Stay. 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 At the center, I stopped. The spiral closed around me, light rising in a column, swallowing sky and ground alike. My body dissolved into it, my reflections splitting into hundreds, thousands, all folding into the same circle. And for the first time since the road began, I felt whole. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hunted. I wasn't lost. I was home. The silence welcomed me, and the spiral closed. I didn't set out to chase danger, but sometimes the road doesn't give you a choice. When you live in a Volkswagen van long enough, you learn that maps are only suggestions, that warnings carved into weather-beaten posts are more than faded paint, and that certain stretches of highway hold the weight of every story that ended there. I was 28, restless, chasing silence and a sense of control after losing too much in the city. And I thought the best way to rebuild was to trust the open road, to believe it would take me somewhere better. But the truth is, the road keeps its own ledger, and some routes take far more than they give. The first time I heard the phrase most dangerous RV road trips, it came from an old man with skin like dried riverbeds, standing outside a gas station in Nevada. My Volkswagen sat by the pumps, hissing softly, its engine heat rolling against the desert air. He squinted at me, at the van plastered with stickers from national parks, and he asked, "You heading north or west?" I told him west, toward California, toward the coast I thought would heal me. He shook his head, slow, deliberate, and said, "Don't take 50. They call it the loneliest road for a reason." At the time, I smiled politely, the way you do when strangers issue vague warnings. But I felt the weight in his voice, and something in his eyes told me he wasn't just repeating a phrase. He'd seen things out there. I should have listened. That stretch of Highway 50 wasn't the first road that unsettled me, but it set the tone. The Volkswagen rattled as wind swept through the desert basin, empty and endless, the kind of emptiness that doesn't just surround you, it crawls inside you, whispering that if you break down, no one will find you in time. The gas stations grew fewer. The road signs rusted into unreadable silhouettes. I gripped the wheel tighter and pretended I was tougher than the silence. But silence is an antagonist too. It makes your own thoughts sound louder, makes every small noise, the hum of the tires, the tap of a stone against the undercarriage, feel like a warning. When I pulled into an abandoned rest area as dusk fell, I convinced myself it was only fatigue. The map showed no official campground nearby, and I didn't have the gas to keep searching. So I parked between two crumbling concrete picnic tables, weeds breaking through the asphalt, and set up for the night. The Volkswagen always felt like a safe cocoon when I slid the side door shut, but that night the air pressed close, heavy with static, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching, slow, deliberate steps outside the van. My first instinct was denial, maybe a coyote, maybe the wind. But the sound stopped directly beside the sliding door, and then there came a knock. Not frantic, not random. 3 steady raps like someone asking to be let in. My chest tightened. I remembered every story I'd ever read about people disappearing on this stretch, about strange accidents that never made sense. I held my breath and waited. The knock didn't come again. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, I gathered enough nerve to peek through the curtain. Nothing. Just the pale wash of moonlight over broken pavement. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When dawn broke, the gravel outside was undisturbed. No prints, no sign that anyone had been there. But my fear didn't fade. It shifted, took root, and followed me. Because once you hear something that shouldn't be there, you can't pretend the road is neutral anymore. You start realizing the road is alive in its own way and it chooses how it tests you. The second road came weeks later, in Colorado. Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain National Park. Everyone talks about the view, the switchbacks climbing above tree line, the tundra stretching out like a frozen ocean. What they don't talk about is the way altitude messes with your head. Up there, every breath feels borrowed. The Volkswagen wheezed and sputtered, fighting the climb, and I felt the same, lungs burning, vision tunneling. It should have been exhilarating, but all I felt was a rising panic, like the mountain didn't want me there. The weather turned fast. Clear skies collapsing into sudden fog, thick enough that I could barely see the hood. That's when I saw the taillights ahead, faint red dots glowing steady. Relieved, I followed, trusting that whoever it was knew the road better than me. For half an hour, I stayed close, winding through curves I couldn't see. Then the fog broke, the taillights were gone, and when I checked the road ahead, it ended in a sheer drop. I slammed the brakes, my van skidding inches from the edge. My whole body shook. There hadn't been any other car. No skid marks, no sign of tires. Just me, my van, and the void. I sat there until the fog cleared completely, until the mountain let me see again. And I realized then that danger on the road isn't always about cliffs or ice. Sometimes it's about the way your mind bends under pressure, how the environment plays tricks until you can't tell what's real. By the time I reached the coast weeks later, I thought maybe I'd left it behind. But the truth is, every dangerous road leaves something in you. I kept driving because that's what you do when you've committed to the lifestyle. But each new stretch of asphalt carried the echoes of the last. Each new forest road, each desert highway carried its own lesson in fear. Some routes take your breath, some take your sense of direction, some take your trust in what you see and hear. And some test whether you can keep moving forward when every instinct begs you to turn back. And still, I drove. Because once you start down those roads, you understand something no one can teach you in books or blogs. The road itself is a teacher, and its lessons come with a price. The Pacific Coast Highway was supposed to be redemption, a reward for surviving the loneliest stretches of the West. I thought ocean air would cleanse me, salt spray washing away whatever lingered from Nevada deserts and Colorado cliffs. But the sea has its own way of teaching, and at night, when headlights carve too narrow a path, the Pacific doesn't forgive mistakes. I drove south from Big Sur, the Volkswagen's beams catching the guardrails that stood like fragile promises against the drop. The ocean below was invisible, swallowed by darkness, but I could hear it. A deep, relentless roar, waves hammering the unseen rocks. It wasn't just water. It was a voice, low and constant, daring me to slip, to misjudge one curve. The fog rolled in as it always does along that highway, sudden and heavy, muting even the van's engine. My windshield reflected only the faint glow of my dashboard. It felt like driving into nothing, like the road had disappeared, leaving only my own motion carrying me forward. That's when I saw another set of headlights in my rear view, too close, too bright. At first, I was relieved. Another traveler meant I wasn't alone on that cliffside. But relief turned to unease when the lights didn't back off. Whoever it was, they followed inches from my bumper, their brights flooding the cabin, blinding me in the mirror. I tried to wave them past, slowing slightly, pulling toward the edge to give space. But they didn't pass. They only matched my speed. I felt trapped, the Volkswagen trembling with each gust of wind, my hands slick against the wheel. Every instinct told me one wrong move would send me over the edge. My chest tightened with the thought, maybe that's what they want. Maybe whoever was behind me wanted to see if fear alone could drive me off the highway. Then, without warning, the lights vanished. One moment, they were blinding me. The next, the mirror was empty, the road behind swallowed whole. No exit, no pull-off, no sound of another engine retreating, just me and the roar of the Pacific. I pulled over at the next turnout, lungs heaving, headlights cutting through fog that no longer seemed natural. I sat there, shaking, waiting for another car to pass, proof that the highway was still part of the same world I'd left hours earlier. None came. Only the sound of water, endless, mocking. It was then I realized something about these dangerous routes. The fear isn't always about what you see. Sometimes it's about what disappears too easily, what slips between the veil of headlights and fog, leaving you questioning whether you were ever safe at all. Days later, I chased calm inland toward Arizona. My map traced the road to Oak Creek Canyon, a place people called beautiful, winding, lined with red rock walls. I thought a change of scenery might settle me, that maybe desert air would balance out the coastal fear. But Oak Creek had its own way of cornering you. The road narrowed as I climbed, switchbacks curling tight, my Volkswagen laboring around each turn. The walls rose close, red stone pressing in like clenched fists, light filtered strange in those canyons, shadows twisting longer than they should. My gut tightened, the way it had on Highway 50, though I kept telling myself it was only the climb, only fatigue. Then I came around a bend and saw the wreck. A camper, older than mine, crumpled against the rocks, its frame peeled open like a tin can. No skid marks, no guardrail torn aside. Just a vehicle that had come to rest as if placed there by invisible hands. I slowed, heart pounding. Through the broken window, I could see the outline of belongings still scattered inside. Blankets, faded maps, a cooler lying on its side. No sign of people, no glass freshly broken. It didn't look abandoned long enough for nature to reclaim it, but too long for anyone to still be alive. I thought of stopping, of checking for plates, for some hint of who they'd been. But something in my chest whispered not to. The air felt thick, charged, as if the canyon itself was holding onto that wreck, refusing to let go. I drove past slowly, eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look too long. That night, I parked at a small campground further down the canyon, a place tucked between trees, the sound of the creek carrying through the stillness. But I couldn't shake the image of that broken camper. Every creak of my van, every snap of twig outside made me imagine footsteps. I kept glancing at my door, half expecting someone to knock the way they had in Nevada, but this time I knew the faces I feared weren't strangers. They were echoes of the people who'd never driven out of this canyon. It was in Arizona that I understood another lesson. Some roads don't just end lives, they keep them. They trap their stories, their fear, and they bleed that fear into you when you pass through. By then, part of me wanted to turn back, but another part, the part that had chosen this Volkswagen life to begin with, insisted there was more to learn, that danger was the price of discovery. So I pushed onward, deeper into the places everyone warned me about. Next was the Dalton Highway in Alaska. The maps alone carried warnings, treacherous, isolated, no services for hundreds of miles. But I was chasing something beyond comfort now, some understanding of why certain routes call to people, even when danger is certain. I wanted to see if the stories were true. I'll never forget the way the Dalton felt. Not just cold, not just remote, but otherworldly. Endless gravel stretching north, pipeline looming like a steel serpent beside the road, trucks thundered past, flinging stones against my windshield, each one sounding like a bullet. My Volkswagen shuddered with every impact, and my nerves frayed with every mile. When night fell, it wasn't just darkness. It was void. Stars smothered by clouds, no houses, no towns, no light but my own. I parked once, thinking I might rest, but the silence was too absolute. It pressed against my ears until I swore I could hear things moving outside. Not footsteps, not animals, but the shifting of the earth itself. And then there were the lights. Not headlights this time. Green and purple curtains rippling above, the aurora twisting in a dance that felt too deliberate, too alive. I wanted to marvel, but instead my chest filled with dread. Because in that emptiness, with nothing but my van between me and the frozen wilderness, The sky didn't look like beauty. It looked like something watching. I didn't sleep that night. I kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, headlights carving only a sliver of the infinite road. Each mile reminded me, danger isn't always cliffs or fog or wrecks. Sometimes it's the sheer vastness, the sense that you are nothing but a flicker against forces too large, too ancient to care if you survive. And yet, I survived. Barely. Each road stripping away another piece of confidence, another layer of denial, until all that remained was truth. The most dangerous routes aren't just physical. They get inside you. They test what you believe about control, about safety, about whether you'll keep driving when the road itself dares you to stop. By the time I returned to the lower 48, the Volkswagen felt more like a scar than a vehicle. Metal skin holding every mile, every memory, every unspoken fear. I told myself I'd find easier roads, routes with campgrounds full of laughter and lantern light. But I never did. Something in me had shifted, and I couldn't turn away from places that unsettled me. They called louder now, like the danger itself was a magnet I couldn't resist. That call brought me east, into the Appalachians. People think of those mountains as gentle, worn down by time. But I found the opposite. Ridges folding over each other like secrets, valleys where daylight barely touched, roads winding like they wanted you to forget where you'd been. My map pointed me toward a scenic byway, a stretch of two-lane blacktop threading through West Virginia. Locals warned me to avoid it after dark. They didn't say why. They didn't need to. I set out late anyway, thinking I could make it through before nightfall. The Volkswagen chugged along, trees pressing close on either side, their branches tangled overhead, blocking out the sun. I hadn't seen another car in hours. The silence grew heavier the deeper I drove, broken only by the groan of the van on the inclines. As dusk slid in, I rounded a bend and saw an old church. Wood siding grayed with age, steeple leaning like it had been watching the road for too long. The parking lot was empty, weeds splitting the gravel, yet the door hung open, swaying slightly, as though someone had just stepped inside. I told myself to keep driving, but when you're alone in a place that's strange, curiosity and fear blur together. I slowed, engine idling low, headlights spilling over the doorway. That's when I saw the shape in the window, a face, pale, staring out. For a heartbeat, I froze, thinking maybe someone needed help. Then the face blinked. Not slow, not human, but a rapid flicker like light itself bending. I slammed the gas, tires spitting gravel, the Volkswagen leaping forward. In my rear view, the church shrank into shadow. But long after it disappeared, I still felt eyes pressing against the back of my skull. The byway twisted on, darkness settling fast. My headlights swept over trees, over rocks, over nothing but the narrow band of road until they didn't. Because at one curve, the beam lit up figures. Dozens of them, standing in the ditch along the shoulder. Men and women, old and young, all still, all facing the road. Their faces were blank, expressionless, but every head turned as I passed, every gaze following me with the same unbroken stare. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that fatigue was warping my mind. But when I looked in the mirror, they were still there, standing motionless in the glow until the curve took them from sight. My heart hammered. I pressed the accelerator harder, the Volkswagen groaning but obeying. I didn't stop until I found a pull-off where I could breathe again. I killed the engine, sat in the silence, listening for anything that didn't belong. What I heard wasn't footsteps, wasn't wind. It was singing, faint, distant, carried through the trees. A low, wordless hum, rising and falling like a chant. It wasn't the melody itself that chilled me. It was the fact that it seemed to move. One moment it came from behind, then from the ridge above, then from the forest ahead. No direction was safe. I fired up the engine again, fear overriding exhaustion. That road stretched for miles, and I drove every one with the sense that something walked just beyond the reach of my headlights, keeping pace. When I finally rolled into a small town, gas station lights burning like salvation, I didn't care that people stared at me like I'd seen a ghost. Because I had. Maybe not one with chains or sheets, but the kind that lingers in places. the kind that waits for the next traveler too stubborn or too foolish to listen. That night, I slept in a Walmart parking lot, my first in months. Neon buzzing overhead, cars rattling past. I'd never been so grateful for artificial noise. But the lesson of that road clung to me. Appalachia doesn't need cliffs or storms to make its roads dangerous. Sometimes the danger is the weight of centuries, of stories buried in mountains that never wanted outsiders to pass through. From there, my compass turned north. I thought the Black Hills of South Dakota might be lighter. Tourist roads, motorcycle rallies, families snapping photos at Mount Rushmore. But the deeper roads, the forgotten ones that branched away from the monuments, told a different story. One night, I followed a winding gravel stretch toward an old Forest Service campground. Pines closed in tight, their scent sharp, almost metallic in the cooling air. My headlights caught the reflective shine of animal eyes. Deer, I told myself, though they didn't scatter, didn't blink. Just stared, frozen, until the van rolled past. The campground itself was empty, half the sites overgrown, fire rings crumbling into rust. I picked a corner spot, killed the engine, and let the quiet settle. But quiet didn't last. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a steady tapping against the side of the van. Rhythmic, deliberate. Not the scuttle of branches, not the random fall of pine cones. I held my breath, listening, counting. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps again. My pulse hammered with the memory of Nevada, of that first night when someone or something had knocked on the sliding door. This time I didn't look. I didn't move. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, praying the van's stillness would make me invisible. But the tapping didn't stop. It shifted, circling the van, each panel receiving its turn. Left side, rear, right side. Pause. Then again, like a ritual. When the sun rose, I stumbled out, exhausted, bracing myself to find tracks, marks, anything. But the ground was smooth, pine needles undisturbed, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing but the lingering smell of resin and the sense that I hadn't been alone. That morning, I drove with the windows cracked, the cold air scouring my lungs, trying to shake the weight pressing against my chest. The Black Hills taught me a different kind of danger. Not sudden, not dramatic, but insidious. A reminder that some roads don't need cliffs or fog to threaten you. Sometimes it's enough for them to remind you that you don't belong. And the more miles I put behind me, the more I realized that belonging had nothing to do with campgrounds or communities. It was about the road itself, whether it let you pass or whether it pressed against your sanity, daring you to break. I thought I'd seen the worst, but the road wasn't finished with me. The Midwest was supposed to be a reprieve. Flat roads, open skies, endless fields where nothing could hide. But there's a trick in thinking emptiness means safety. Wide horizons don't always offer comfort. Sometimes they just leave you exposed, nowhere to run when the sky decides to break open. I was crossing Kansas when the storm found me. The Volkswagen had been humming steady all morning, a rare calm after weeks of mountain switchbacks and forest shadows. Wheat stretched in every direction, gold bending under the wind, and I told myself maybe this part of the country held no teeth. I was wrong. The first warning came as a shift in light. Afternoon sun dimming too fast, not like sunset, but like something heavier had been draped across the sky. Then the horizon bruised purple, clouds swelling high and black, rolling toward me with a speed that made my chest tighten. The radio crackled out a warning I could barely hear. Severe thunderstorm, tornado potential. I gripped the wheel tighter, scanning for a place to pull off, but there was nothing. Just fields and road, mile after mile. The air thickened, heavy, pressing against the van until each breath felt shallow. Lightning flashed behind me, then ahead, jagged veins cutting across the dark. The Volkswagen rattled as wind hit broadside, pushing me toward the ditch. I kept driving, knuckles white, until the rain came. Not drops, sheets. A wall of water slamming against the windshield, wipers useless, visibility gone in seconds. The road disappeared, swallowed whole. My headlights reflected back at me, blinding instead of guiding. That's when I realized I wasn't driving anymore. I was floating, the van hydroplaning across the slick asphalt. I fought the wheel, praying for traction, until finally the tires gripped again, jarring me back to control. Heart pounding, I spotted a faint gravel lane cutting off to the right. I didn't care where it led. I turned, wheels skidding, and followed it until I reached a small cluster of cottonwoods. I parked beneath their trembling branches, engine idling, rain hammering the roof like fists. And then the sound changed. The rain still pounded, but beneath it came a roar, low at first, then building, a freight train without tracks. The cottonwoods bent, their branches snapping, debris slamming against the van. I ducked low, pressing myself against the floor as the Volkswagen rocked side to side. The roar grew deafening, primal, until for a moment I thought the van would lift clean off the ground. Then, just as suddenly, it passed. The roar faded, the rain softened, and silence returned. I sat up, shaking, heart still thundering. When I opened the door, the air smelled of earth and ozone, sharp and raw. The field beyond was shredded, stalks ripped flat, debris scattered like bones. The gravel lane behind me was gone, erased by mud and fallen branches. That was the night I learned that some roads don't need haunted churches or ghostly headlights to kill you. Sometimes the land itself decides, and there's nothing you can do but hold on. I thought the storm would mark the worst of the Midwest, but I wasn't finished with those endless highways. A week later in Missouri, I found myself on a road that didn't appear on my map. I'd been following signs for a state campground, twisting through back roads, when the pavement narrowed to cracked asphalt, weeds sprouting through the seams. The Volkswagen jolted over potholes, trees pressing close again. The road wound deeper, darker, until finally I reached a fork. No signs, no markers, just two lanes, identical, vanishing into shadow. I chose left, hoping it would loop back to somewhere familiar. But the deeper I drove, the stranger it felt. The air grew humid, sticky, as though I'd descended into a swamp. The smell of damp rot filtered through the vents, sharp enough to sting my nose. I slowed, headlights slicing through a mist that hadn't been there minutes earlier. Then I saw the signs. Not official ones. Wooden boards nailed to posts, hand-painted with crude warnings. Turn back. No campers, no return, each one more warped, more unreadable, as though the forest had been reclaiming them for years. My chest tightened, instincts screaming, but the road behind me felt just as heavy. I pressed on, nerves raw, telling myself I'd find an outlet soon. When the van crested a hill, I saw it, a clearing, empty except for the husk of another vehicle. A Volkswagen, like mine. Same model, same color. Rusted, half-collapsed, vines twisting through shattered windows. I stopped dead, engine humming, headlights catching the reflection of my own van in its broken glass. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just another wreck. It was a mirror, an echo, like the road itself had been waiting to show me. I didn't get out, couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I stepped into that clearing, I wouldn't return. I reversed slowly, tires crunching gravel, eyes never leaving that ruined van until the mist swallowed it again. Hours later, when I finally emerged onto a main road, I checked my map. No trace of the fork. No trace of the lane I'd followed, as though it had never existed. That night, parked at a proper campground, lanterns glowing warm and safe around me, I kept thinking about that other van, about the way its broken windows had caught my headlights, about how easily it could have been mine. And I realized then that the danger of the road isn't only storms or cliffs or strangers in the fog. Sometimes it's the reflection of your own path staring back at you, reminding you that every mile carries the possibility of ending exactly where someone else did. The Midwest gave me storms and shadows, roads that erased themselves, wrecks that shouldn't exist. But I kept driving because by then, turning back wasn't an option. I wasn't just traveling anymore. I was chasing something. Answers, maybe, or proof. Proof that the road wasn't just coincidence, wasn't just asphalt. Proof that it remembered. And the further I went, the more it remembered me too. The desert was supposed to be simple. A straight line under endless sky, no tricks, no haunted ridges or collapsing cliffs. That's what I told myself as I pointed the Volkswagen toward the southwest, into New Mexico and Arizona again, where the sun carved the land into stone and shadow. I thought wide open spaces would free me from the claustrophobia of forests and the suffocation of storms. But deserts hold their own danger, disorientation. It started on a stretch called the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man. Even the name should have warned me. The highway cut through scrub and sage, the horizon trembling in heat, no towns for miles. My van droned steady, a tired hum that became the only sound in a landscape so empty it seemed to hum back. After hours, the monotony turned strange. I'd pass a mile marker, 107, then drive what felt like 20 minutes before seeing it again. 107, faded white paint leaning in the dust. I frowned, checked my odometer, convinced fatigue was tricking me, but the numbers kept repeating. Mile marker 107, then 108, then back to 107 again. The Volkswagen rattled harder the longer I drove. My palms sweated on the wheel, the horizon shimmering as though it shifted while I blinked. The desert wasn't endless, it was circular. A trap. I pulled over, heart hammering, stepping into air hot enough to sting my lungs. Silence pressed close, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. I walked to the marker. 107. I touched the faded paint, rough under my fingers, then turned back toward the van. That's when I saw them. Footprints, in the sand beside the road. Not mine. Bare, deep, leading away from the asphalt into scrub. They trailed off into nothing, but something about them felt wrong. Too wide, too long, the stride uneven, as if whoever made them wasn't walking but dragging themselves forward. I climbed back into the van, slammed the door, and drove. Faster this time, refusing to glance at the shoulders. The odometer spun, the sun crawled west, but the road never changed. Mile 107. Again. Again. By dusk, panic had taken hold. My throat burned, my vision blurred, and I whispered to myself, just to break the silence. Finally, when night dropped like a curtain, I saw headlights ahead. Relief surged, desperate. Another traveler meant proof I wasn't alone. I followed the lights, gripping the wheel as though they might pull me free. They stayed just far enough ahead that I couldn't catch them. But I chased anyway, mile after mile, until the road straightened and the lights swerved suddenly off to the right. I slowed, scanning for a junction, a driveway, anything. But there was nothing, just desert stretching empty. No turn, no road, no lights. My chest collapsed. I pulled over, engine idling rough, headlights casting weak cones over dust. I wanted to scream, to pound the wheel. Instead, I shut off the van, locked the doors, and curled into the back, praying sleep would break the loop. When dawn came, the desert looked different. The markers ticked forward as they should, the road stretching toward distant mountains. But the panic lingered, raw and gnawing. Some routes don't want you to leave. And if you're not careful, they'll trap you until you're nothing but another set of footprints fading into sand. I thought I'd escaped, but panic isn't something you leave behind. It follows, crouches in the passenger seat, waiting for the next opportunity. And the desert wasn't done. Days later, I aimed the Volkswagen down a dirt road toward Canyonlands in Utah. I'd been told there were hidden spots, backcountry sites where you could park on the rim of the world, stars spilling overhead in silence. I wanted that silence, but what I found was something else. The road narrowed, red dust rising behind me, cliffs looming on either side. The van jolted over washboard ruts, tires slipping near edges where stone dropped hundreds of feet. I gritted my teeth, pressing on until the track ended in a flat expanse of rock. Perfect campsite, I told myself. Perfect view. I parked, stepped out, and felt the heat radiate through my boots. Below stretched a labyrinth of canyons, twisting shadows swallowing the desert floor. Wind whispered over the rim, carrying grit that stung my skin. It should have been awe I felt. Instead, it was dread. That night, I built a small fire, its glow a fragile bubble against the vast dark. Stars burned sharp above, cold and endless. I should have felt small in a beautiful way, but the longer I sat, the more the silence pressed, not empty, but expectant, like the canyons were listening. Then came the sound. A scrape, a shift of gravel behind the van. I froze, listening. Another scrape, closer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the flashlight, swept it across the ground. Nothing. Just dust. Just stone. I told myself it was wind until it came again. From the other side this time. A dragging sound, heavy, circling the van. I spun, light slicing the dark, but always too late. The sound moved faster, keeping to the edges of vision. I stumbled back inside the Volkswagen, slammed the door, locked it. The van rocked slightly, not from wind, but from weight pressing against the frame. I held the flashlight tight, breath ragged as shadows shifted outside, long and warped, stretching across the windows. Minutes passed like hours. Then, without warning, the van lurched. Just once, as if something had pushed it hard. My stomach dropped, bile rising in my throat. I didn't wait. I turned the key, engine coughing to life, gears grinding as I threw it into drive. The van skidded across rock, tires clawing for grip, until I hit the dirt road again, dust clouding behind me. I didn't stop until daylight. Didn't look back to see if anything followed. When I finally pulled over, hands trembling, I realized the firewood I'd stacked outside was gone. Not scattered, not burned, gone. Panic isn't just fear. It's the certainty that the road itself wants to consume you, piece by piece. That night in Canyonlands, I understood. Some places don't want you to camp, don't want you to rest. They want you to leave, or they'll take something from you until you do. And yet, I kept driving because panic fades into adrenaline, and adrenaline into obsession. I told myself I was collecting lessons, warnings for others. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just surviving dangerous roads, I was becoming part of them. The South came for me next. I thought the swamps might be easier, softer, a place where the road ran flat and the nights hummed with frogs and cicadas. But swamps don't let you pass without consequence. They breathe differently. They hold their secrets just under the surface, waiting for wheels to sink and minds to falter. I entered Louisiana at dusk, the Volkswagen rattling across a 2-lane bridge stretched over black water. Cypress trees rose on either side, their roots twisting like claws, moss dripping in pale curtains. The air smelled of rot and damp heat, thick enough to choke. I rolled down the window, thinking fresh air might help, but it only made me feel swallowed. The swamp wasn't a place you visited. It was a place that absorbed you. Halfway across the bridge, the dashboard lights flickered. The van sputtered, coughed, then caught again. I cursed under my breath, knuckles tight on the wheel. Breaking down here would mean more than inconvenience. I pressed the gas, coaxing the engine forward, my eyes darting to the guardrails, to the black water beyond. It didn't feel still. It felt alive. And then I saw it. A shape breaking the surface beside the bridge. Not a gator. Bigger. Long and pale, ridged like the spine of something ancient. It moved parallel with me, just under the water, keeping pace as the Volkswagen clattered forward. My stomach clenched. I pressed harder on the gas. The shape slid beneath the bridge, vanished into shadow. I didn't breathe until I hit solid ground again. Even then, the relief was thin. Because when I glanced in the mirror, the water behind me rippled as if something had followed all the way. The campground I found that night was small, tucked against the trees, half submerged in mud. Fireflies blinked like signals, but the air felt wrong, heavy, close, carrying a sour, sweet stench that clung to my skin. I told myself I'd only stay one night, just long enough to rest, but rest never came. At midnight, I woke to the sound of dripping. Slow, steady, inside the van. My first thought was a leak, condensation gathering in the humid air. I flicked on the flashlight. The ceiling was dry. The sound continued, louder now, a wet patter against the metal floor. I swept the beam toward the sliding door and froze. Water was seeping under the seal. Dark, thick, not clear like rain. It spread across the floor in a thin sheet, smelling of decay. I scrambled to lift my feet, gagging on the stench. Outside, frogs croaked louder, overlapping until it sounded less like nature and more like chanting. I threw the van into gear, tires spinning in mud, engine whining. The Volkswagen lurched forward, like it's just water sloshing inside as if the swamp itself was trying to drag me back. Branches whipped the sides, shadows bending in the headlights, until finally the road opened, gravel crunching under the tires again. When I stopped miles later to breathe, the floor was dry. No water, no stench, only the echo of it in my nose and my throat, reminding me that I hadn't imagined it. That's when I realized the swamp wasn't just dangerous in body. It was dangerous in memory. It didn't need to drown you physically. It could plant itself inside, leave traces you couldn't wash away. I pushed east after that, thinking maybe Florida would be different. The Everglades had always fascinated me. Open sawgrass, endless sky, but danger there doesn't roar, it whispers. I drove a back road at dusk, mosquitoes thudding against the windshield, the air hot and metallic. Water pressed close on either side, dotted with lily pads that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the van's idle. I parked at a primitive campsite, no other rigs around, the ground soft under my boots. The night was alive with sound, frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something unseen. I told myself it was normal, background music to swamp living. But around midnight, the rhythm changed. The frogs fell silent. The splashes grew steady, closer, like something large moving just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, drawn by instinct and dread. Moonlight cast silver over the water. The lily pads shifted, not random, but deliberate. They rose, fell, pulsed outward as though from breath. I froze, heart hammering, watching the pads expand in a circle that crept closer to shore. Then the smell hit. Damp earth, yes, but deeper, sweeter, like rot at the bottom of a grave. My stomach churned. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on a root before diving back into the Volkswagen. I slammed the door, locked it, pressed my back against the seat. The water outside gurgled, bubbled, then stilled. The pads lay flat again. Silence stretched until the night itself seemed to hold its breath. And then a sound, not splash, not wind. Breathing, heavy, slow, directly beneath the van. I couldn't move, couldn't think, just sat frozen, every nerve screaming. Minutes passed, hours maybe. By dawn, the sound was gone. The air smelled clean again. But when I stepped outside, the ground beneath the van was damp, dark circles spreading outward like something had pressed itself there, exhaling through the soil. I left the Everglades without looking back. Hands shaking on the wheel, every nerve raw. Because I understood then that some roads don't just carry danger on their surface. They carry it beneath, waiting for you to stop, to rest, to forget. And once you hear breathing where there shouldn't be breath, you never forget. The South taught me dread in a different way, not cliffs, not storms, not loops or ghosts. Dread here was steady, creeping, seeping under doors and through memory. A reminder that not all dangers are sudden. Some wait, patient until you believe you're safe. And I knew then, as I drove north again, that my journey wasn't about avoiding danger anymore. It was about learning how to live with it, how to let the road shape me without breaking me. But the road wasn't finished. Not yet. I thought I'd left the worst behind when I turned north again. The swamps clung to me, yes, but I told myself mountains would feel more familiar, more honest. Rock doesn't whisper. Rock stands solid. That was the lie I carried as I pointed the Volkswagen back toward the Rockies, into Colorado once more, chasing higher ground. But winter had already settled in, and the mountains don't forgive arrogance. The pass I chose wasn't the safe one. I ignored the main routes, lured by a dotted line on the map labeled Scenic Byway. Locals had shaken their heads when I mentioned it. Not this time of year, one man at a diner told me. I laughed it off, proud of how far my van and I had come. Pride blinds. Snow started light, flakes spinning in the beams of my headlights as I climbed. The Volkswagen groaned, tires slipping now and then, but I pressed on. The higher I drove, the thicker the snow fell, until the world shrank to the strip of white ahead and the walls of fir trees crowding close. I kept telling myself I could turn back, but each switchback pulled me deeper, the road narrowing, no place wide enough to reverse. My hands cramped on the wheel, knuckles aching as gusts rattled the van, snow swirling so thick I could barely see the hood. That's when the sound began. A hollow thunk against the roof, then another. I flinched, thinking of branches ice, but the sound was deliberate, spaced evenly. Thunk, 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 like footsteps on the van moving from front to back. My breath fogged the windshield. I wanted to believe it was only heavy snow sliding free, but the roof sagged slightly with weight, creaking as though something crouched there. I didn't dare stop. I pressed the gas, the van crawling forward, tires slipping, heart hammering with each thunk overhead. When I reached the next curve, the weight lifted. The sound stopped. I exhaled, hands trembling, but relief never lasts on these roads. Because when I glanced in the side mirror, something leaned into view. A face, pale against the snow, pressed to the glass. Not outside, not in the trees, reflected as if it were sitting in the seat beside me. Eyes hollow, lips blue, staring straight into mine. I jerked the wheel, the van skidded, fishtailing toward the edge. My stomach dropped as headlights swung out over nothing, canyon yawning below. I slammed the brakes, heart stopping, until the tires caught, jolting me back. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Just me, wild-eyed, panting, shaking against the wheel. I should have turned around. I should have admitted defeat. But pride, panic, and the narrow road trapped me. I pushed upward, higher, deeper, until the snow swallowed everything. By the time I reached the summit, the storm had become a whiteout, the van lurching forward, blind. I couldn't stop. Stopping meant freezing, meant being buried alive in snow and silence. So I kept driving, mind unraveling with each mile. Shapes moved in the whiteness, figures walking just beyond the beams, keeping pace, shadows that shouldn't exist where no light reached. I muttered aloud to keep sane, voice shaking, just snow, just wind, just tricks. Hours blurred. Finally, the road tilted downward, winding through trees again. Relief surged, fragile. But panic still clawed at me because the van wasn't built for this. Brakes squealed on ice, tires slid sideways, each corner threatening to send me over. My chest felt like it would split, breath ragged, body locked in fear. At last, I saw lights. A lodge, glowing warm against the storm. I pulled into the lot, van stuttering, and cut the engine. My hands shook so badly, I couldn't open the door. I just sat there, gasping, staring at those lights as if they might erase everything. When I finally staggered inside, strangers looked at me with a mix of pity and alarm. I must have looked wild, frost clinging to my beard, eyes too wide. I collapsed near the fire, heat burning against frozen skin, and for the first time in weeks, I let the panic out, trembling, choking breaths, tears I didn't want anyone to see. The mountain had nearly broken me, not just with cliffs or snow, but with the face I'd seen, the weight I'd felt above me. I didn't know if it had been real or if the road had finally bent my mind too far. But the fear was real, carved deep. And even in that lodge, surrounded by warmth and voices, I knew the road wasn't finished. It had tested my body, my pride, my sanity. Next, it would test something deeper. Because once you've looked into eyes that weren't supposed to exist, once you've driven blind while the road tried to erase you, you stop asking whether the danger is real. You start asking whether you're still the same person who began the drive. And my answer was already clear. I wasn't. The lodge gave me rest, but it didn't give me peace. Even with heat on my skin and food in my stomach, I couldn't shake the feeling that the road was still watching, still waiting for me to climb back behind the wheel. And it didn't take long before I did, because no matter how many times I swore I'd stop, the Volkswagen always pulled me onward. I told myself I'd take easier roads, lower elevations, safer routes. But safe doesn't exist when the road itself remembers you. I drifted back toward Nevada, drawn by the desert, even though it had nearly broken me before. Wide horizons promised freedom. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. It was night when I found myself on Highway 375, the extraterrestrial highway, they called it. A straight shot through barren land, nothing but sagebrush and stars. The Volkswagen hummed steady, headlights stretching across asphalt that seemed to have no end. I rolled down the window, letting cold desert air cut through the haze in my head. At first, it felt almost calm. The stars above were sharp, so many they blurred into rivers of light. But then I noticed something strange. One star brighter than the rest, pulsing faintly. I squinted, kept driving, telling myself it was Venus or a plane. But the longer I watched, the more I realized it wasn't fixed. It was moving, slowly at first, drifting across the horizon, then faster, until it was keeping pace with me, far off but steady, always in the corner of my vision. My pulse quickened. I pressed the gas, engine groaning, the Volkswagen rattling harder. The light matched my speed. I tried not to look, tried to keep my eyes on the road. But when I glanced again, the light was closer, too close. It wasn't in the sky anymore. It was hovering above the desert floor, maybe 100 yards out, gliding alongside the van without a sound. My chest clenched. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands ached. Every instinct screamed to keep moving. The van roared louder, climbing to speeds it wasn't built for. But the light stayed with me, unwavering, as if it wasn't chasing me, as if it was hurting me. The desert blurred, road vibrating under my tires. Sweat stung my eyes. Then, just as sudden as it appeared, the light shot upward. A streak of brilliance tearing into the stars, gone in an instant. I slowed, shaking, lungs burning as though I'd run miles on foot. Relief trickled in, fragile, but it didn't last. Because that's when I saw the sign. A battered green highway marker, mile 107. My throat went dry. Not here. Not again. Not the same cursed number from the Jornada del Muerto. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming against asphalt, the van skidding to a halt in the middle of that endless desert road. Dust rose around me, choking the headlights. I sat frozen, staring at the marker, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, just a number, just another mile. But deep down I knew better. The road was folding back on me. Panic surged. I jerked the van into reverse, tires squealing, backing down the highway until the marker disappeared into the dark. Then I shifted into drive, gunning it forward by praying the next sign would break the pattern. A mile later, another marker stood ahead, white numbers catching the light, 107. I screamed, a raw, broken sound, and pounded the wheel. My chest heaved, lungs on fire. The desert was a loop, a trap, and I was the animal running circles inside it. I drove without thinking, pushing the van harder than I ever had, engine screaming in protest. Hours blurred into madness. Each time I passed the sign, something inside me cracked a little more. Mile 107, mile 107, over and over until numbers meant nothing, until I felt the road itself had erased all other destinations. At some point, exhaustion overpowered fear. My vision tunneled, headlights dimmed, and I let the van drift to the shoulder. I slumped in the seat, trembling, the hum of the cooling engine the only sound in the universe. When I woke at dawn, sunlight painted the desert gold. The markers ticked forward again, 108, 109, 110, as if the night had never happened, as if the loop had been nothing but a fever dream. But the terror didn't fade, because I knew then what escape really meant. It wasn't about outrunning cliffs or storms or strange lights. Escape meant surviving your own unraveling long enough to keep moving. Escape meant driving until the road decided to release you. That morning, as I sipped bitter coffee from a cracked thermos, I realized how thin the line had become. Each road was demanding more trust, more sanity, more of me. And one day it might ask too much. I should have turned back, should have stopped chasing these routes that tested me beyond breaking. But I didn't, because something inside me wasn't looking for escape anymore. It was looking for an ending, and the road was more than willing to provide one. Every dangerous road I'd taken had left its mark. Nevada's silence, Colorado's cliffs, the Pacific fog, the swamp's breath, each one carved deeper, until I wasn't sure there was anything left of the person who had first turned the Volkswagen west. I wasn't just driving anymore. I was unraveling, mile by mile. So when I heard about the Devil's Backbone in Kentucky, I knew I should have avoided it. Locals called it cursed, a stretch of ridgeline road barely wide enough for one vehicle, twisting with no guardrails, no pull-offs. People vanished there. Accidents happened without explanation. The name itself should have been enough to turn me away. But I went anyway, chasing some proof that all the warnings weren't just stories. The road began innocuous, two worn lanes cutting through farmland. Trees bent over the asphalt, shadows dappling the van as I drove. But soon the ground fell away. The Volkswagen climbed onto a spine of rock, narrow and sharp, with sheer drops yawning on both sides. The ridgeline stretched ahead like the back of some ancient beast, and the van crawled along its vertebrae. Wind screamed across the ridge, shoving at the van, tires grinding against cracked pavement. My palms slicked with sweat. I forced myself to keep eyes forward, but the edges pulled at me, whispered of how easy it would be to slip. Halfway across, the fog rolled in. Not desert haze, not mountain snow. This was thick, white, suffocating. I slowed to a crawl, headlights swallowed whole, the road vanishing beneath me. Every instinct screamed to stop, to wait it out. But stopping here meant leaving the van perched on the spine with nothing but air on either side. So I kept moving. That's when I saw the taillights. 2 red dots glowing ahead, steady, unhurried. Relief surged. I wasn't alone. I followed close, trusting that whoever they were knew the road better than I did. The lights wound through the fog, curving gently, pulling me along. For a few moments, my fear softened. Then the road straightened. The taillights flickered and blinked out. I slammed the brakes. The van skidded forward, tires shrieking, stopping inches from empty space. The ridge ended in a drop, nothing beyond but fog and void. My breath caught in my throat. There had been no turn, no exit. The taillights hadn't led me forward. They'd led me off. I sat there shaking, sweat freezing against my skin, lungs clawing for air. The fog pressed tighter, muffling the world, until I couldn't tell if I was still moving or if the ridge itself had begun to sway. I shut my eyes, whispering to myself, "It's not real. It's not real." When I opened them, the taillights were back, behind me this time, hovering in the fog closer than before. Panic surged. I slammed the gear into drive and lurched forward, hugging the edge of the ridge, praying for solid road beneath my tires. The lights followed, steady, unhurried, never dimming, never falling behind. My chest ached, vision tunneling, until finally, the ridge dropped into forest again, the fog thinning, trees reappearing on either side. The road widened. I floored the gas, the van rattling, until the taillights dissolved into mist behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away, collapsing against the wheel as the pump clicked. My hands trembled too hard to swipe my card. A man at the next pump asked if I was all right. I wanted to laugh, to tell him I'd nearly followed a ghost straight off a ridge. Instead, I just nodded, hollow, and muttered, "Long drive." But inside, I knew something had shifted. That road hadn't just scared me. It had cornered me. It had forced me to see the truth. Every dangerous route was the same. They weren't random. They weren't accidents. They were connected, testing me, stripping me down until there was nothing left but raw instinct. And now, standing on the edge of collapse, I started to wonder. Maybe the danger wasn't in the roads at all. Maybe it was in me. Maybe I'd been carrying it all along, and the roads were just mirrors showing me what I didn't want to admit. That thought haunted me more than cliffs or storms or swamp breath. Because what if I wasn't escaping anything? What if I was only driving deeper into myself, into something I couldn't outrun? I pressed on, because that's what I always did. But the more I drove, the more the lines blurred, between danger outside and danger inside, between what was real and what I carried with me. Every mile pressed heavier until I realized there could only be one end to this road, and it wasn't safety. By then, the Volkswagen had become more than a van. It was a vessel, a witness, a mirror. Every dent and rattle carried the weight of roads that had nearly erased me. And still I drove, pulled toward one last stretch I'd been warned about since the beginning. They called it the most dangerous road in America, the $1 Million Highway in Colorado. I told myself I had to face it. If every other route had been a test, this was the final exam. Sheer cliffs, no guardrails, blind curves, avalanches waiting above. People had died here, and yet people still drove it every day. That paradox alone was enough to pull me in. The climb began steady, sun flashing off snowpack, the van's engine straining with each incline. The road clung to the mountainside, asphalt barely wider than a shoulder, the drop beside me plunging thousands of feet. No barriers, no forgiveness. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles burned white. Every sense sharpened. The rumble of tires, the groan of gears, the hiss of wind scraping across stone. I forced myself to breathe slow, to keep eyes forward, to ignore the yawning emptiness at the edge of vision. Then came the first curve, blind, sharp, curling around a wall of rock. I slowed, hugging the mountain as tight as I could, praying no one barreled down the opposite side. My heart pounded with every foot of progress. The van crawled, tires spitting gravel that rattled off into the void. At the second curve, I felt it. A shift. Not in the van, not in the road, but in the air itself. Heavy, electric, pressing against my skin. I knew that weight. The same weight that had followed me in the desert loops, in the swamp's breath, in the face I'd seen reflected in the glass. The road was watching. The fog rolled in without warning. White, thick, suffocating, swallowing the cliff, the mountain, the sky. My headlights cut nothing but milk. My chest seized. This was the devil's backbone again. This was the canyon, the desert, the swamp, all of them converging here. And then I saw them. Not taillights this time. Not figures in trees. Faces, dozens of them, pale and hollow, floating in the fog outside the windshield. Eyes blank, mouths open in silent screams. They crowded closer with every curve, pressing against the glass until I could see the frost of their breath. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The van crawled forward, engine groaning, the cliff invisible beside me. My mind screamed to turn back, but there was no back. Only forward or down. The faces pressed closer, merging into one shifting mass, their mouths opening wider. For a moment, I swore I heard them. A low chorus, not words, but something deeper. A sound that vibrated in my chest, in the frame of the van, in the bones of the mountain itself. I screamed back, raw, broken, forcing the van faster. Gravel spat out from under the tires, stones tumbling into the abyss. The chorus rose, the fog thickened, until I couldn't tell if I was still on the road at all. Then suddenly, the fog broke. The van burst into sunlight, the cliff falling away into a valley below, green and alive. The faces vanished. The chorus silenced. Only the wind remained, sharp and clean. I slammed the brakes, the van skidding to a halt at a turnout. My chest heaved, vision blurred, hands trembling against the wheel. I stumbled out, boots crunching gravel, and collapsed to my knees. The valley stretched below, endless and bright, but I couldn't see beauty. All I saw was survival. I had made it through. But the road hadn't let me go untouched. It had taken pieces, trust, calm, belief in safety, and it had left something behind. A truth I couldn't escape. The most dangerous RV road trips aren't about cliffs or storms or ghost lights. They're about what they force you to see in yourself. The panic you bury, the denial you cling to, the suspicion you ignore until it consumes you. Every mile strips you down until you're nothing but raw instinct, and then it asks, will you keep driving? I don't know why I survived when so many others didn't. Maybe the road chose to let me pass. Maybe it wanted me to carry the story, to warn others. Or maybe it simply wasn't finished with me yet. Because when I look at the Volkswagen now, parked and still, I swear I can hear it ticking, whispering, urging me back behind the wheel. And I know I will. Not because I want to, not because I believe I'll escape, but because the road has already claimed me. And once it does, you never really stop driving. End of segment 10, approx 1,215 words.